Chapter 724. The sun was rising, and the sun was shining brightly. At the end of summer and the beginning of autumn, Yuzhou ushered in a rare good weather. Bathed in the golden sun, when Hua Qingfeng knocked on the door of the Bai family's villa with a cautious face, what he felt was not the surging killing intent and oppressive atmosphere in the villa, but calmness. Everyone in the Bai family was calm. Dong Qingwudi was also calm. As for Li Tianlan, who had caused an uproar, he was even calmer. The family was having breakfast in the dining room. Seeing the servant coming over with Hua Qingfeng, Li Tianlan casually waved to him and said in a calm voice, "Have you eaten? Let's have some together." Minister, Your Highness, Speaker Bai, Secretary General. Hua Qingfeng was stunned for a moment and greeted him unnaturally. He looked very awkward. Even if you want to catch him, you don't have to be in such a hurry, do you? In the faint voice, Bai Qingqian came out of the kitchen with a plate of fried eggs. She glanced at Hua Qingfeng and said in a lukewarm tone. At this moment, even the Shadow Sect Master, who had been with Li Huaqing all year round, felt a little out of breath. From the moment he entered the door to the present, except for Li Tianlan, only Bai Qingqian said something to him, but the dissatisfaction in her tone was clearly expressed. Dong Qingwudi and Bai Zhanfang were eating. They didn't seem to notice Hua Qingfeng's arrival at all. They didn't even lift their eyelids. This kind of quiet calmness seemed to clearly express the indifference and hostility of the Bai family and the Dongqing clan, and then it turned into a huge pressure, which almost made Hua Qingfeng breathless. Hua Qingfeng stood stiffly and looked at Li Tianlan, who was eating breakfast slowly. He didn't dare to urge him, nor did he know what to say. He could only be silent. In the silence, he could clearly feel that the giant group and the academics, who had decided to cooperate because of Li Tianlan and had been cooperating happily for more than 3 years, seemed to be drifting apart because of Li Tianlan. The rift between the two groups was getting bigger and bigger, to the extent that it could almost tear apart the honeymoon period of cooperation between the two sides. The Qi family was destroyed. Li Tianlan had touched the bottom line of Zhongzhou state. As the president, Li Huaqing was bound to punish Li Tianlan severely. But as the leader of the academics, it was not appropriate to do so. The general direction and personal position were always in conflict. Hua Qingfeng could not deny the correctness of Li Huaqing's action, but he did not dare to agree with his resolute approach. So the contradiction turned into silence. He stood there, looking at Li Tianlan with great patience. "How are sect masters' injuries?" Li Tianlan asked casually. "It's all right." The corners of Hua Qingfeng's mouth moved, and he squeezed out a smile. He had not recovered from the serious injuries he had suffered in Eastern Europe. In fact, he had been staying in the hospital of the giant group to recuperate recently. When the Burning Legion raided the hospital, he barely fought with the experts of the Burning Legion for a few moves, which affected his injuries and made his internal injuries more serious. In fact, Hua Qingfeng was not in the lineup to capture Li Tianlan. But for some reason he came here with his injuries. Who are these people? Li Tianlan's tone did not fluctuate at all, and he concentrated on the breakfast in front of him. They were all very homely breakfasts. Bai Qingqian, who was in a high position, cooked them in person. Naturally, they could not be as delicious as those made by professional chefs. Millet porridge, fried dumplings, fried eggs, and a few light side dishes were common, but Li Tianlan enjoyed them very much. The Ministry of Security, the General Staff Department, the Special Operations Bureau, the Shadow Sting Army. Hua Qingfeng quickly said the names of more than a dozen agencies, all of which were well-known elite forces in Yuzhou. These agencies were dispatched at the same time, which represented the attitude of Zhongzhou state. It was roughly estimated that in order to capture Li Tianlan, Zhongzhou state had dispatched at least 5,000 people this time, and he was afraid that more people were preparing at this time. This could definitely be said to be a real big move. So, the manor of the Bai family has been surrounded now, right? Bai Zhanfang suddenly spoke slowly, and there was no joy or anger in his voice. Hua Qingfeng's body suddenly straightened for a moment. He forced a smile and said, "Chairman Bai, we're not targeting the Bai family. As a matter of fact, the personnel of various departments are currently at the periphery of Qingshan. They're about 3 kilometers away from the manor. 2 hours ago they were already there. Under the order of the parliament, no one has approached the manor of the Bai family. You know what this means. Bai Zhanfeng twitched the corner of his mouth, but he did not speak. Hua Qingfeng's forehead was already oozing sweat. After the hospital of the giant group was raided, the giant group had made arrangements as soon as possible. All the wounded were arranged in another sanatorium, and it was still centralized treatment. But this time, in order to ensure that the sanatorium was safe, Wei Kunlun, the new invincible realm expert of Zhongzhou State, personally stayed in the hospital. And Hua Qingfeng was also treated in that sanatorium, but more than an hour ago, he was jointly invited by the Ministry of Security and the General Staff Department to capture Li Tianlan. To capture Li Tianlan in the manor of the Bai family. These were completely different things. Only to capture Li Tianlan, not many people dared to do it, or were willing to do it. At this time, they also had to offend the Bai family, so no one was willing to do it. The extermination of the Qi family was indeed shocking, and it touched the bottom line of Zhongzhou State. But after seeing the performance of Fan Tianyin, the minister of the Ministry of Security, the anger in the hearts of others dissipated unconsciously. Fan Tianyin was calm from beginning to end. He accepted the order of Zhongzhou State and came to the Bai family's manor with the elites of the Ministry of Security. Then there was no then. Qi Mulin was the deputy minister of the Ministry of Security. He was killed, which was a slap in the face of the Ministry of Security. But Fan Tianyin was not angry at all, and it was clear that he was not willing to rush over to capture Qi Mulin. Since he was like this, the others were even more cautious. No one was willing to offend the Bai family. And no one dared to offend Li Tianlan. The miserable end of the Qi family was still vivid in their minds. Li Tianlan was completely a madman. He dared to kill Qi Mulin. If he was really annoyed, why didn't he dare to kill others? Qi Mulin had been killed. If he killed 1 or 2 more people with the same position as Qi Mulin, how serious could the crime be? Therefore, the elites of all agencies were gathered near Green Mountain, but they were unwilling to step into the Bai family's manor. The leaders gathered together to discuss and finally decided to invite Hua Qingfeng over. Hua Qingfeng was the chief of staff of the Snowdance Corps. He had fought side by side with Li Tianlan in Eastern Europe. With this friendship, there was at least a leeway to ease the situation. Hua Qingfeng was undoubtedly very annoyed, but he also knew that such a stalemate was not a solution. Moreover, the so-called capture at least left some leeway. After hesitating for a while, he finally walked into the Bai family's manor. What does the parliament mean? Li Tianlan stood up from the table, wiped the corners of his mouth with a napkin, and said with a smile, "Where do they want to take me? Or do they want to kill me directly?" "No." Hua Qingfeng said with a wry smile, "The parliament means that if your highness doesn't resist, we should invite you to the conference room in the Hidden Dragon Sea." If he resisted, of course, there was nothing to say. They could just kill him directly. This kind of arrest with a lot of leeway also told all agencies involved in the arrest a message. Now, although this matter was very big and Zhongzhou State's response seemed tough, in fact, Zhongzhou State still hadn't made up its mind. If Li Tianlan didn't resist, they would directly invite him to the Hidden Dragon Sea. This attitude was enough to explain the problem. At least, it proved that Li Tianlan had the possibility to get away from this matter. The major agencies that grasped this point were even more unwilling to offend Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and nodded, saying, "In that case, let's go." He reached out his hands to Hua Qingfeng and said with a faint smile, "Do you want to cuff me?" Hua Qingfeng smiled bitterly and said awkwardly, "Your Highness, you must be joking." He turned slightly and said respectfully, "Your Highness, please." Li Tianlan turned around and his eyes fell on Bai Qingqian. Bai Qingqian was also looking at him. Her eyes were soft and full of complexity. Li Tianlan subconsciously avoided her eyes and said dryly, "Auntie, I'll go." Bai Qingqian was silent for a while and nodded. "Let's go too." Bai Zhanfeng put down the bowl and chopsticks and glanced at Dongqing Wudi. One of them was a director of Zhongzhou State, and the other was a member of Zhongzhou State. Naturally, they also had to attend. And the next meeting? Dongqing Wudi nodded and said calmly, "Okay." Li Tianlan said no more and went straight out with Hua Qingfeng. A black Audi was parked outside the villa. When Li Tianlan came out, the driver had trotted to open the door for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan sat in the car, leaned against the back of the chair, and closed his eyes to rest. The car slowly left the manor and Qingshan. Farther away, the elites of the major agencies began to retreat silently while breathing a sigh of relief. At 7:15 a.m., the black Audi slowly stopped in front of the conference room in the hidden Dragon Sea. Li Tianlan got out of the car and looked at the flag of Zhongzhou State standing in front of the conference room. His expression became more and more indifferent. "Your Highness." Hua Qingfeng followed Li Tianlan, wanting to say something but stopping on second thought. "What's wrong?" Li Tianlan asked. "Nothing." Hua Qingfeng forced a smile and braced himself to say, "I'll go in with your Highness." Li Tianlan didn't aggressively ask Hua Qingfeng what he meant by accompanying him into the conference room. He just said, and strode into the conference room. The conference room, which had just ended, was full of people again. All the members of Zhongzhou State. All the 9 directors were present. Only Gu Xingyun's seat was empty. Li Tianlan glanced at the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State in the conference room and didn't speak. His eyes fell on Li Huaqing's face and he said calmly, "What's the matter?" "Comrade Li Tianlan." Li Huaqing's deep voice sounded, and his address was very formal. "We asked you to come here to confirm where you were between 3:15 and 3:50 last night." Everyone's eyes were focused on Li Tianlan's excessively young face. Li Tianlan laughed, bland, casual and careless. "I was on Rosewood Street." He slowly walked forward and entered the conference room. The high-level officials in the conference room seemed to be shocked. No one expected Li Tianlan's answer to be so straightforward. "What were you doing on Rosewood Street?" Li Huaqing looked at him, expressionless. "I wandered around and killed some people by the way." Li Tianlan approached the conference table. "Stop!" A member of parliament stood up nervously, looked at Li Tianlan, who was getting closer and closer, and said in a deep voice. Li Tianlan glanced at him, and his footsteps didn't stop at all. "I killed some people." Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes. "So, you killed 19 members of Comrade Qi Mulin's family?" Li Tianlan walked into the conference table, pulled a chair, and sat down. He looked at Li Huaqing and said blandly, "I killed them. What do you want?" No one spoke. The conference room suddenly quieted down. Chen Fangqing's face twitched, and he didn't speak. But the eyes of the 2 directors and several members of the Southeast group suddenly became a little gloomy. Not because of Li Tianlan's answer, but because of his position at this time. When he admitted that he was the one who killed the Qi family, he was already sitting in front of Li Huaqing. This position could not be regarded as the end of the rectangular conference table. He and Li Huaqing were facing each other, and it was hard to say which was the main seat. Everyone looked at Li Tianlan sitting there, and their eyes were a little complicated. That was because this position was already taken. For many years, there were only 2 people sitting at both ends of this conference table. At one end was the president. At the other end was Sword Emperor. And now, the president was still sitting at one end of the conference table. At the other end was Dong Huang, who was so young that people couldn't believe it. Li Tianlan sat there quietly, looking calm, watching the whole conference room. In the silence, his voice slowly sounded, extremely domineering and arrogant. "Tell me," he said blandly, "what do you want?" Chapter 725. Young and Vigorous. At this moment, Li Tianlan, who was sitting in the conference room and watching the council members, interpreted the word to the extreme. The meeting of the Parliament of Zhongzhou State had always been solemn, and even sacred. In the past many years, even Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, who occasionally showed his brilliance, was reasonable and steady. Li Tianlan did not intend to be reasonable, nor did he intend to save anyone's face. The purpose of this meeting was very simple. It was to discuss the extermination of the Qi family. Li Tianlan directly admitted that he killed them, and then looked at the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State openly, asking them what they wanted. At this moment, almost everyone was angry. Li Tianlan's indifference and contempt were almost completely shown on his face. That kind of carelessness completely challenged the bottom line of the parliament of Zhongzhou State again. It seemed that no one had ever dared to be so presumptuous on such an occasion since the founding of Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes, and his deep eyes suddenly became extremely piercingly cold. Why? He looked at Li Tianlan and said in a low voice, one word at a time. The kind of long-term high position and the power of the whole Zhongzhou State became an unimaginable momentum that shrouded Li Tianlan with unimaginable heaviness. Everyone in the conference room could feel the anger behind Li Huaqing's calmness. His voice was very light, but it echoed in the conference room like rumbling thunder. Qi Mulin is the mayor of Xianyuan City appointed by the parliament. Before that, he was the deputy minister of the Ministry of Security. Li Tianlan, you are also a member of Zhongzhou State. A few hours ago, you were even the marshal of Zhongzhou State. You personally slaughtered nearly 20 people of Qi Mulin's family. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? Did you care about the decision of the parliament? Did you care about the laws of Zhongzhou State? In your eyes, what are Zhongzhou State and the parliament? Li Huaqing's voice was getting louder and louder, and his tone was getting more and more agitated. Li Tianlan's domineering had completely angered the president, who had been very gentle since he took office. At this moment, he even really wanted to kill Li Tianlan. The majestic anger was getting clearer and clearer in the conference room. At this moment, everyone was silent, and only Li Huaqing's voice kept ringing. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time, and then said lightly, Mr. President, you misunderstood me. What do you mean? Li Huaqing was aggressive. As the president of Zhongzhou State, in addition to paying attention to the development of Zhongzhou State, he also had to maintain the dignity and order of Zhongzhou State. Compared with the former, the latter could even be said to be his most important job. Li Tianlan killing Qi Mulin sounded one thing, but the former marshal of Zhongzhou State killing the new mayor of Xianyuan City was another. This was a challenge to the order of the entire Zhongzhou State, the most dangerous beginning. To exaggerate it, it was even the beginning of subverting the whole system. Li Huaqing could not tolerate such a thing, even if he thought highly of Li Tianlan. Because he was the president of Zhongzhou State. If something bad happened to Zhongzhou State in the future because of what happened to Li Tianlan, then everything would be his responsibility. Therefore, even if it was his own son who had done such a thing, Li Huaqing must take him down today, not to mention a young man he thought highly of. I'm a member of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan said calmly, even not long ago, I could barely be regarded as a member of the core power of Zhongzhou State. This is my country. I have awe for Zhongzhou State, and I also have respect for the parliament. I will abide by the order of Zhongzhou State, and I am willing to uphold the decision of the parliament. Killing Qi Mulin has nothing to do with the parliament or Zhongzhou State. Tell me your reason. Li Huaqing clenched his fists, gritted his teeth and said, I don't like him. Li Tianlan said softly, without any anger in his voice, so I killed him. In fact, I am willing to respect any decision of the parliament. Zhongzhou State is a vast land with abundant resources, and some talents can always be found. Xianyuan City has just started, and the system in its jurisdiction is being rebuilt, so it is not difficult to manage. Zhongzhou State can appoint a new mayor for Xianyuan City, and I support the decision of Zhongzhou State 100%. Everyone was dumbfounded. Li Huaqing was stunned for a moment. Li Tianlan killed Qi Mulin not because of the decision of the parliament, but because he didn't like him? You fucking killed him because you didn't like him? You even killed his whole family? Are you kidding me? Li Huaqing's mouth twitched violently for a long time, and he couldn't even speak for a while. Li Tianlan had asked the parliament to reconsider the new mayor of Xianyuan City for the second time. His voice was very sincere. But this time, no one spoke at all. Elect a new mayor? Are you kidding me? Even an idiot wouldn't believe that Li Tianlan didn't like Qi Mulin. And even if he believed it, there must be a reason to dislike a person. The reason why Li Tianlan disliked Qi Mulin was that he was the mayor of Xianyuan City. What kind of person was Qi Mulin? He was the most dazzling rookie in Zhongzhou State in recent years, the adopted son of the former director Qi Baitsong, and the future leader of the Special Warfare Group. If such a person could be killed because he didn't like him, would they send someone else to Xianyuan City to take up the post? Would they really take up the post? That was completely courting death. Maybe the next day, Li Tianlan would dislike the new mayor and kill him again. Li Tianlan could do this kind of thing. He could really do it. Qi Mulin's lesson was deep enough. Even if the directors and members of parliament were really stubborn and dared to send a mayor who didn't meet Li Tianlan's requirements to Tianan, it was estimated that no one would dare to accept this post. Establishing power. That was establishing power. The bloody lesson of the Qi family was enough to make everyone flinch from this post. You don't like him. The corner of Li Huaqing's mouth trembled, and his voice was a little twisted. You can kill him because you don't like him? Who gave you the right? I'm just protecting the interests of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan casually said, I received news that Qi Mulin is likely to have something to do with the Burning Legion's invasion of Tianan, and even Qi Mulin may have committed treason. I took action at this time to prevent Zhongzhou State from suffering greater losses in the future. Nonsense. Li Huaqing slammed the table and flew into a rage. Sitting next to him, Chen Fangqing's arm trembled slightly. He looked at Li Tianlan with a somewhat complicated look in his eyes. I'm just telling the truth. Li Tianlan opened his eyes and didn't blink. Anyway, Qi Mulin was dead. Whatever he said was the truth. He had given him a way out. However, Li Huaqing obviously didn't intend to give in. He just said coldly, Qi Mulin committed treason? Where did you get the news? Have you investigated? Why did you investigate Qi Mulin? You didn't investigate? How can you speak without investigating? Even if it's true, why didn't you report the situation to the parliament in time? Time was too tight. I didn't have time. Li Tianlan still opened his eyes. It's ridiculous. With Qi Mulin's status in Zhongzhou State, what good can it do him to collude with the Burning Legion? Your Highness Li Tianlan, a murderer must pay with his life. It's meaningless to say some nonsense reasons. In the gentle voice, Hua Zhenyang, the vice minister of the cabinet, slowly opened his mouth. His voice was extremely cold. But everyone at the meeting was shocked. Because of Hua Zhenyang's words. A murderer must pay with his life. On such an occasion, every word of Hua Zhenyang couldn't be said casually. As Li Huaqing's right-hand man, his words represented the attitude of the whole academics. This time, it touched the bottom line of the academics. Did they directly want to kill Li Tianlan? Let's not talk about the benefits first. Since Your Highness Li Tianlan said that Qi Mulin committed treason, there must be some reason. I think we can check it first. Vice President Wan Qingyun said calmly. Even if Qi Mulin is guilty, Li Tianlan doesn't have the right to kill him directly. Chen Fangqing said lightly. But he doesn't deserve death. Qi Mulin committed treason. Li Tianlan killed him. In order to safeguard the interests of Zhongzhou State, it's understandable that young people are impulsive. Wan Qingyun said tit for tat. At this point, Xianyuan City could be put aside for the time being. The academics and the prince group wanted to punish Li Tianlan severely and maintain the authority of Zhongzhou State, especially the authority of private territories like Tianan. And the Southeast group wanted to maintain its territorial consciousness and protect Li Tianlan. The focus was not on Xianyuan City at all, but on Li Tianlan. As long as Li Tianlan was protected, the Southeast group would withstand the first wave of temptation of Zhongzhou State. So now no matter what Li Tianlan said, the Southeast group was willing to believe it. Even if he didn't say anything, the Southeast group would find a reason to protect him. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and looked at Chen Fangqing again. They had enough psychological preparation for the reaction of the Southeast group. But the firm reaction of the Southeast group still made them a little angry. Wan Qingyun's attitude had already explained the problem. It showed that in the next game, the Wang family of Beihai had no intention of compromising. When they just took action, the Wang family of Beihai had already taken action. Comrade Yunhai, you are the Minister of Politics and Law of Zhongzhou State. What do you think of this matter? Li Huaqing was silent for a while, suddenly turned his head, and called the name of the leader of the North Group. This was the only group that was outside of the big group. and he was in charge of the politics and law of Zhongzhou state. It was natural for him to show his attitude at this time. Li Huaqing's name call was not abrupt. Zhou Yunhai's attitude was crucial. Protecting Li Tianlan was the bottom line of the giant group and the southeast group. Punishing Li Tianlan severely was the goal of the academics and the giant group. This was almost a copy of the previous meeting. At least in terms of the contrast of power, there was no change. In the situation where the two sides were clearly separated, Wang Qinglei would not keep silent this time. After all, he was a member of the Wang family of Beihai. No matter how big the rift inside Beihai was, Wang Qinglei still had the territorial awareness that he should have. In this way, Zhou Yunhai's attitude became the key of the key. Li Huaqing and Shen Fangqing still did not understand the sudden defection of the North Group. At this time, Li Huaqing called the name, undoubtedly to really see Zhou Yunhai's attitude. Zhou Yunhai was stunned. He picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea, then said slowly, "I think we can slow down. If Qi Mulin really committed treason, Li Tianlan's action this time is pardonable. We still have to investigate this matter. But the impact of this matter is very bad. Even if Qi Mulin really committed treason, Li Tianlan has no right to kill. I think it is not suitable for your highness to go to Tianan for the time being. How about taking a rest for a while?" There was a moment of silence in the conference room, and countless eyes exchanged quickly for a moment. This time, Zhou Yunhai did not change sides. But he did not take sides either. On such a sensitive issue, the North Group chose to be neutral without hesitation. By not supporting Li Tianlan, they did not offend the Giant Group and the Southeast Group. And letting Li Tianlan temporarily rest for a while was undoubtedly supporting the academics and the Prince Group, even though it was far from the support they needed. Li Tianlan sat there expressionlessly, waiting for the result of his trial by the parliament. As time went by, the meeting showed no sign of ending. Time went from morning to noon. It was close to evening again. The heated debate almost lasted for nearly 12 hours. When the night was about to fall, under the watch of countless people in Zhongzhou state, the parliament finally made a response to this incident. Qi Mulin was suspected of treason. The parliament ordered the Ministry of Security, the General Staff, the Ministry of Politics and Law, and the Ministry of Supervision to set up a joint task force to carry out a detailed investigation. The Ministry of Personnel of Zhongzhou State officially issued a document appointing Ning Qianxing as the mayor of Xinyuan City. The punishment of Li Tianlan was suspended. From now on, Li Tianlan, the palace lord of Eastern Palace, would be temporarily sent to the desert prison for an undetermined period of time. After the investigation result of the task force came out, he would be dealt with separately. The game had begun, and the outcome was still unknown. Chapter 726. The night was hazy. When Li Tianlan walked out of the conference room, he was a prisoner. One day ago, he was the marshal of Zhongzhou State. One day later, he had become a prisoner of Zhongzhou State. Nothing was more changeable than this. Throughout the meeting, Li Tianlan behaved very calmly. He frankly admitted that he was the murderer of the Qi family and gave a reason. Then he didn't say a word during the whole meeting. When the result of the meeting came out, he didn't react and calmly accepted the judgment. He would be imprisoned as a prisoner in the most mysterious and terrible desert prison in Zhongzhou State. There was no time limit and it would be executed immediately. Zhongzhou State Councillor, Dongqing Wudi, Deputy Minister of Army Headquarters, Zhongzhou State Councillor, Yi Dongxing, Deputy Minister of Army Headquarters, and Hua Qingfeng, the leader of Zhongzhou State's shadow sect, were jointly responsible for the escort mission. The helicopter had landed on the tarmac at the end of the meeting. The pilot was ready to set off at any time. Li Tianlan stood in front of the conference room and looked at the quaint, calm and solemn hidden dragon sea in his sight. He was silent for a long time. He was not surprised by the result. Southeast, wealthy families, Crown Prince, and Academy. These were the four largest supergroups in Zhongzhou State today. When they joined hands, the contrast of power between them was infinitely close, and no one could take advantage of each other. The game between the two sides could only be a stalemate when neither of them was fully prepared. A stalemate was destined to leave room for maneuver. In this way, Zhou Yunhai's plan of not offending either side became a plan that everyone could reluctantly accept, or it was a balance. Li Tianlan was imprisoned in the desert prison, the task force was set up, and Ning Qianxing was appointed as the mayor of Xinyuan City. This series of results was a balance, and both sides left room for each other. Qi Mulin's treason case was just the beginning. The investigation of the joint task force seemed to be powerful, but in fact, behind the scenes, it was still the means of the four groups. If Qi Mulin was finally convicted of treason, Li Tianlan's crime would be greatly reduced, and he would be free. But if it turned out that Qi Mulin's treason was not true, an indefinite detention. Unless Li Tianlan chose to commit treason, kill his way out of the desert prison, and then become the enemy of Zhongzhou State, the most powerful country in the world. Otherwise, he would either be locked up until he died or be executed by Zhongzhou State in secret. I hate this feeling. After a moment of silence, Li Tianlan looked at the night sky in the distance and suddenly said, "Destroying Qi Mulin's family was truly cold-blooded and brutal. Such a move seemed reckless, but there were some things that Li Tianlan could see very clearly. Because he could see it clearly, he was so calm. When the helicopter landed in front of him and was about to fly to the desert, Li Tianlan was still a little annoyed. This was because he realized that even now, he still couldn't control his own fate. What would happen next? He actually had to wait for the final result of the game between the four major groups. Li Tianlan did not like this feeling. He didn't like it at all. If you do something wrong, you will have to pay the price. Li Huaqing stood beside Li Tianlan, his voice gentle. All the counselors and directors had left. In front of the huge conference room, there were only two people standing. It was hard to tell whether they were enemies or friends. The pale and tired president was a little dispirited, but he still forced himself to look at Li Tianlan. I once heard someone say that the so-called freedom is not to do what you want, but not to do what you don't want to do. Obviously, you don't understand this. That so-called freedom is not freedom. Li Tianlan said blandly. Li Huaqing smiled. Tianlan, your means this time are very clever. To some extent, you took advantage of the bottom line of the Wang family of Beihai. But a mistake is a mistake. It's not taking advantage. I'm just guarding my own things, that's all. Li Tianlan said coldly, Tianan is mine. Some rules can't be broken. You are not qualified to directly control the overall situation of Tianan. Although you are very strong, you are too young, and Emperor Dong's palace is also too young. At least in the eyes of the parliament, you don't deserve such qualifications. You have the right to resist, but now this is the result of resistance, and this result will only get worse and worse. What's the point of your protection? Li Huaqing shook his head. His words were extremely straightforward. In the whole meeting, the academics completely played the leading role in demanding that Li Tianlan be punished severely. Today, Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan might not be completely hostile, but the conflict of ideas between them completely broke out because of this meeting. Li Tianlan was sent to the desert prison. No matter what the result of the game was, the honeymoon period of cooperation between the giant group and the academics had officially ended. So I'm still not strong enough. Li Tianlan smiled. If I stand here today and reach the height of Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe, maybe it won't be the result now. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes slightly and was silent for a while. Then he said lightly, if you can reach the height of Wang Tianzong, you won't choose to do this. Although the Sword Emperor is strong, his strength is not supported by an invincible sword. In fact, for so many years, the compromise between advance and retreat of the Wang family of Beihai is the key to their current situation. Zhongzhou State is not a person's Zhongzhou State. Neither you nor Wang Tianzong can violate the bottom line of Zhongzhou State. Wang Tianzong must understand this better than you. So his Tao is not my Tao. Li Tianlan's voice was very calm. He just gave me a little inspiration. I always believe that when a person is strong enough, one person and one sword can defeat the whole world. Is this your Tao? Li Huaqing smiled sarcastically. How about it? Li Tianlan asked. It doesn't sound good. It's too strong and easy to break. Tianlan, you can't do that. Even if you can really defeat the whole world doesn't belong to you. Li Huaqing said lightly, I'm not sure what will happen to you in the future. But even if you can get out of the desert prison with your status in Zhongzhou state, you can't do what you said. I don't know about the relationship between man and sword, but between people, there is only politics. At a time when everyone is talking about balance and compromise, your blindness and aggressiveness will only get you killed. He patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and said softly with a smile, the main melody of politics is never struggle but compromise. I've seen the youthful vigor. But Tianlan, now you are far from mature in my eyes. If you have time, read more about the history of Zhongzhou state, especially the history of Beihai. You will be very interested. Li Tianlan lowered his head and thought about it. After a long while he asked, Really? Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and looked at the helicopter in the distance. He said calmly, You said that you are the overall situation of Zhongzhou state, which actually makes some sense. But I can't accept what you did last night. Comrade Li Tianlan, during the time you are in prison, I will try my best to achieve the result I want. It doesn't matter whether I succeed or fail. If I lose and you can get out of the desert prison, then you are qualified to say that you are the overall situation of Zhongzhou state. With a serious expression, he turned around and held out his hand to Li Tianlan. So goodbye. Goodbye. Li Tianlan shook hands with him and stepped down the steps. Li Huaqing's last words contained too many meanings, and Li Tianlan had no time to think about it for a while. But in the next period of time, the last thing he lacked was time. He walked to the helicopter with steady and calm steps. Li Huaqing stood behind him and looked at his back expressionlessly. No one knew what he was thinking. When Li Tianlan was about to leave his sight, his figure suddenly stopped. Li Huaqing raised his eyebrows for a moment. In the clear night sky, Li Tianlan's voice rang in his ears. When I leave the prison, I want to see you at the gate of the prison. Li Huaqing did not respond. Li Tianlan did not wait. The roar of the helicopter's rotors sounded in the night. The flashing signal light was gradually rising. Li Tianlan looked down, and his face was full of thoughts. Have a good rest for a while. Dong Chengwudi, who was personally in charge of escorting the felons, said slowly. His face was also a little tired. The president and the prime minister are undoubtedly very dissatisfied with the result tonight. It's not a good result, but it's still far from their expectations. They reluctantly accept it, but we can completely accept it. Zhongzhou state will not be too peaceful in the future. Your Highness has been showing off recently. It's good to restrain yourself for a while. Since Zhongzhou state has approved the appointment of Ning Qianqing, it will also maintain his authority when necessary. Neither the president nor the prime minister will object to this. They are all people who abide by the rules. Therefore, Your Highness's unruly behavior will make them so angry. Your Highness, you don't have to worry about Tianan. With Xianyuan City, some things in Emperor Dong's palace will be on the right track as soon as possible. When you come out, maybe it will be a different scene. Yi Dongxing smiled slightly and said calmly. Now the Southeast Group and the Giant Group were on the same side. In order to deal with the offensive of the Prince Group and the academics, the two sides would definitely strengthen cooperation. No one would have thought that the Southeast Group, which had a huge conflict with Li Tianlan, would choose to cooperate with him, while the academics, which had been cooperating with the Giant Group, would gradually drift away from them because of this meeting. There were no eternal enemies and no eternal friends. In the general trend, this sentence was almost the most reliable truth. I have nothing to worry about in Tianan. Li Tianlan shook his head. The Burning Legion had suffered heavy losses, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital could not deal with it for the time being. With the support of the Freedom Corps and Ning Qianqing as the mayor of Xianyuan City, a relatively stable environment in Tianan was beneficial to Emperor Dong's palace. It's just that Rushi, Li Tianlan hesitated for a moment. At this moment he thought of not only Dongqing Rushi, but also Wang Yuetong and Qin Weibai. But Li Tianlan had no time to see all of them. You don't have to worry about Rushi. Your Aunt Bai and I will take good care of her and do our best to make her recover. Dong Chengwudi said slowly. It's good that she can wake up, Li Tianlan muttered to himself. He subconsciously took out his mobile phone and dialed Qin Weibai's number. But after thinking about it, He hung up the phone that had not been connected yet. The screen was still on. He had changed his mobile phone several times, but the wallpaper on the screen was still the picture of him and Qin Weibai snuggling together in the dormitory against the sea outside the window when he first entered the Sky Academy. Li Tianlan looked at the picture and was lost in thought. He suddenly felt that something was wrong, but he could not tell what was wrong at the moment. Chapter 727. Summer solstice had lunch and dinner in Prince Yang's mansion. When the meeting of the council was in a state of mutual hostility, the two women who could influence the general trend in the dark world now seemed to be very relaxed. Summer solstice and Qin Weibai were chatting. This was a very novel feeling for both of them. For them, it was rare for them to meet someone of the same sex whose thoughts and achievements were infinitely close to their own. It was not that there were no such people in the dark world, but the time to stand together and chat was undoubtedly a luxury. Therefore, although neither of them was particularly talkative, they got along very well after spending a day together, if they put aside the secret positions and crises. However, the body of the war god that Qin Weibai wanted was not delivered until dinner was served. Summer solstice explained that the Wang family of Beihai needed some time to prepare. Qin Weibai did not say much. Summer solstice was not in a hurry. She was not in a hurry either. Summer solstice, who had been observing Qin Weibai's mood, suddenly felt a little curious. She looked at Qin Weibai, who was quietly serving rice, and suddenly smiled. I don't know if it's an illusion, but I suddenly find that you don't care about the body of the war god very much. Or, you don't care as much as I thought. Why should I care? Qin Weibai asked. You know what the body of the war god means. Li Tianlan was seriously injured now, but he didn't need the body of the war god at all. This was the last half. The Wang family of Beihai might not be able to make a second half for a long time. Leaving this half in Li Tianlan's hands meant that Li Tianlan really had one more life. To put it bluntly, even if Tianzong recovered to his peak state in the future, he would not attack Li Tianlan unless he had to. On the contrary, Li Tianlan, who has the body of the war god, is the one we need to guard against. If he breaks through to Tianzong's current level one day, he can even use this trump card to hurt Tianzong and die with him. Then he can recover with the body of the war god. Summer solstice smiled gently, but there was hesitation and unwillingness in her eyes. To some extent, this half of the body of the war god means that Emperor Dong's palace will have the initiative to face the Wang family of Beihai in the future. There is no reason for you to have such an attitude. Because it's destined to be mine. Qin Weibai brought the dishes to the table and sat opposite Summer Solstice. She said softly, others can't take them away. I don't have to worry about the gains and losses of my own things. Summer Solstice looked at Qin Weibai with a complicated look in her eyes. I don't know if my decision today is right or wrong. If Tianzong knows, I'm afraid he will blame me. She looked at Qin Weibai and asked seriously, if you were in a neutral position, how would you evaluate my decision today? This is the smartest method and the most appropriate decision. Qin Weibai took a sip of soup and said without raising her head. Really? Summer Solstice sneered. That is the truth. Qin Weibai looked into Summer Solstice's eyes. We don't need to emphasize the importance of the body of the god of war again. This would be one of the core trump cards of Emperor Dong's palace. Even if Tianlan got the body of the war god, he might not attack the Wang family of Beihai, even if Wang Tianzong returned to the state in Eastern Europe. You know this very well. The body of the god of war is something that can be inherited from generation to generation. The stronger Emperor Dong's palace is, the more deterrent it will be. If Tianlan stands at the peak in the future, a sword emperor who returns to the state of Heavenly Sun is not worth Tianlan attacking and wasting this trump card in his hand. Not worth it? Summer Solstice narrowed her eyes. I'm sorry. Qin Weibai smiled apologetically. That's not the right word. To be exact, there is no reason. The Li family and the Wang family of Beihai have been entangled for hundreds of years, but you are not Kunlun City. Even if you also played a very disgraceful role in the treason case, to be honest, neither I, Tianlan, nor even Li Honghe or Li Kuang to think that the Li family must fight with the Wang family of Beihai to death. Kunlun City must die, not because of their betrayal and despicableness, but because Kunlun City blocked the way of Emperor Dong's palace to control the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. That's all. Standing in this position, personal grudges are far less important than gains and losses in the overall situation. Wang Tianzong will recover, and Tianlan will make a breakthrough. Even so, the two sides will not necessarily fight with each other to death. So what if Tianlan kills Wang Tianzong? It's just to vent his anger, but he will get nothing. Zhongzhou State can't watch Tianlan take everything in Beihai when he has Tianan. This is the real bottom line of Zhongzhou State. So even if Tianlan destroys the Wang family of Beihai, it will only benefit others. In this case, why should he do it? And don't forget, Yue Tong is the little princess of Beihai. With this relationship, Tianlan can't even vent his anger when he destroys Beihai. He will only be more depressed. I can't get practical benefits, but I'm embarrassed. Tianlan won't do this kind of thing unless I have to. At least in my opinion, it's better for Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai to maintain a relationship of being opponents but not mortal enemies than to be entangled with each other until they die. She held the silver tableware with her white hand and knocked on the plate in front of her. She chuckled and said, "This is the reason why I want to cooperate with you. I believe Wang Tianzong will think so." The most fundamental reason why Wang Tianzong always wanted to get rid of Li Tianlan was that he thought Li Tianlan would be a threat to the Wang family of Beihai in the future. In this idea, the most important word was not a threat. It was the future. Li Tianlan would be a threat in the future. That also meant that he was nothing at the moment. He was just an ant that might cause him trouble in the future. If he could get rid of him now, he would. That was Wang Tianzong's original motive. That was all. So Wang Tianzong wanted to kill Li Tianlan for two reasons. One was that there might be trouble in the future, and the other was that Li Tianlan was too weak. If Li Tianlan could stand at the same height as Wang Tianzong, he would have Emperor Dong's palace to compete with the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong's idea would naturally change, because then Li Tianlan would be very strong and hard to deal with. The reason was also so simple. And the simpler reason was the same as what Qin Weibai just said. In that case, even if Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace were destroyed, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. They wouldn't get any benefits, but others would benefit for nothing. Instead, they would suffer great losses. Such behavior was not taken by the wise, and it was even more unnecessary. The world never belonged to one person, even if one person could defeat the whole world. The Wang family of Beihai was very strong. With the powerful strength of the Wang family of Beihai, at its peak, even before Wang Tianzong was injured, it had the strength to destroy most of the superpowers in the Dark World. But it didn't mean that it could be unified. Again, it was useless to mobilize a large number of people and go through a lot of trouble. To sum up, it was really not necessary to destroy the Wang family of Beihai. Of course, it didn't rule out the possibility that the Wang family of Beihai couldn't accept the gap and had to harm Emperor Dong's palace without benefiting itself. And the key was this half of the body of the war god. Li Tianlan had no psychological advantage over the Wang family of Beihai. He could look at the relationship with the Wang family of Beihai and the consequences of the entanglement between the two sides more rationally, so as to make the most rational choice. And this half of the body of the war god was the key to maintaining the balance between the two sides. I don't want to touch you, not that I can't touch you. This advantage and deterrence was what Li Tianlan had to have, and it was also what summer solstice paid for today. In fact, if there were no major accidents, such advantages and deterrence were meaningless. The body of the war god was a fusion potion. It was also the peak achievement of the Wang family of Beihai today. The so-called fusion was not the fusion of countless different potions, but the fusion of one kind of potion. 100 years ago, when the second-generation immortality potion that could surpass the original version was successfully developed, the Wang family of Beihai had discovered a very embarrassing fact through countless experiments. That was, the huge vitality contained in the immortality potion was actually not perfect to some extent. The vitality provided by the immortality potion injected into the body could indeed make the body glow with unimaginable vitality. But to put it bluntly, it was the vitality that was forcibly supporting the body. It was not the body that was maintaining the vitality. If this result continued for a long time, there would be some extremely bad changes sooner or later. Because the vitality of the immortality potion was too strong, to some extent, the immortality potion had been regarded as a life-saving thing by the peak experts of the Wang family of Beihai in times of crisis. Using the immortality potion at the first time when suffering an extremely fatal injury could quickly restore most of the injured to the peak state. But this way of using was completely different from the original intention of the immortality potion. The original purpose of the immortality potion was to simply enhance the human body's endurance and relieve a few people who were overdrawn or even on the verge of collapse because of martial arts. The person who first put forward the idea of the immortality potion was also from the Wang family of Beihai. She was the little princess of the first generation of the Wang family of Beihai. And the purpose of her research on the immortality potion was also to save her beloved man, the ancestor of the Lin clan, who was constantly overdrawn and almost faced the threat of death in the process of achieving martial arts. He was also the founder of Xuanyuantai and the Li family. This purpose was so pure. She devoted all her efforts to research and finally made the immortality potion. She succeeded, but it could also be said that she failed. Because the huge vitality of the immortality potion could indeed improve the human body's endurance to a certain extent and relieve the body's pressure. But its biggest function was to increase vitality. Such a means was just a supplement, not the expected perfect recovery. This also directly led to the immortality potion being the core and the peak technology of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years, but its position had always been a little awkward. The vitality was too huge and intense. The most suitable thing for it was to quickly heal injuries. This kind of replenishment, or rather, the replenishment was too intense. If a person was really on the verge of death, or even if their body was weak to a certain extent, not only would the tremendous amount of life force not allow them to recover, but it would also cause them to explode due to the problem of too much replenishment and intense. This was the core secret of the Wang family of Beihai, and also the most embarrassing secret. The vitality of the immortality potion could not be perfectly integrated with the vitality of the human body itself. They could only drive each other. This vitality filled in could only achieve the effect of delaying. And the premise was that the user's own body would not be too weak. This also meant that if one wanted to use the immortality potion, he had to take it when the body did not actually need it. When it was really needed, he could not use it. It also meant that no matter who the user was at the very beginning, he had to waste a part of the vitality of the immortality potion. The vitality provided by the first generation of immortality potion was enough for a person to live for another 20 years. The vitality of the second generation of immortality potion was stronger than that of the first generation. But in fact, because it could not be used at the last moment, the second generation of immortality potion did not have much advantage over the original version. Most of the extra vitality was wasted. It was from that time that the Wang family of Beihai realized the most fundamental problem. That was, the immortality potion could only be filled, but it could not be integrated, let alone activated. So someone proposed two directions. One was to develop the third generation of immortality potion with the goal of completely activating the vitality of the human body. The second was to return to the original intention, with integration as the goal. The integration of the immortality potion was not the pursuit of vitality, but the ultimate reinforcement of the human body's endurance, to create a perfect body that was almost immortal in all aspects. Such integration was not without clues, but it was extremely extravagant. Because this was the integration of the immortality potion and the immortality potion. It turned out that an absolutely perfect body also meant vitality beyond everyone's imagination. The finished product of this potion was almost invulnerable to any damage and any overdraft. In all aspects, it was absolutely impeccable. Such a finished product could almost make up for all the shortcomings of the immortality potion. In order to commemorate the original creator and user of the immortality potion, the Wang family of Beihai gave it an unusual code name: the body of the god of war. Chapter 728. Whether for Beihai or Zhongzhou state, the word god of war had an extraordinary meaning. The first god of war of Zhongzhou state was the founder of Zhuanyuantai, the ancestor of the Lin clan. He was the first god of war of Zhongzhou state and the first god of war of the Wang family of Beihai. In a sense, he could even be called the only god of war. In the founding history of Zhongzhou state, the first god of war had guarded Zhongzhou state for nearly 80 years and the Wang family of Beihai for nearly 80 years. 80 years. For any enemy, this was enough time to make them completely desperate. It was during this time that the god of war and the first chosen one of the Wang family of Beihai joined hands and established the position of the strongest country in the world of Zhongzhou state. At the same time, it also established the glory of the Wang family of Beihai that lasted for hundreds of years. The Wang family of Beihai named the integration plan of the immortality potion the body of the god of war. It was nostalgia and reverence. At the same time, it also revealed their ambition in some ways. Summer Solstice's face was a little pale. No one knew what it meant for the Wang family of Beihai to take out the only body of the god of war at this time. Qin Weibai sipped the soup. Her diet was light and exquisite. She didn't eat much for dinner. Most of the dishes on the table were prepared for Summer Solstice. She held the spoon in her white hand and looked at Summer Solstice's pale face. She suddenly said, "Has Wang Tianzong used the body of the god of war?" Summer Solstice nodded and said nothing. Qin Weibai frowned and said in a tone without any emotion, "But you just said that the Wang family of Beihai hasn't broken through the technical bottleneck of the body of the god of war." Summer Solstice's face became more and more pale, but it was not panic but helplessness. The integration was successful. Her voice was a little low. "At least we are on the right path and are very close to the end. The effect of the body of the god of war has been proved, but it is not perfect." Qin Weibai seemed to think of something and nodded. "How imperfect is it?" "The effect," Xia Ji said with a wry smile. "At present, we can be sure that the effect of the body of the god of war has already surpassed immortality, or even far surpassed it. However, it is still a long way from the perfect state we expected. The current body of the god of war can already reconstruct a person's body to a certain extent, but it hasn't reached the perfect state we expected. Tianzong's injuries are severe. I won't hide it from you because it's meaningless. He's tried countless ways to stabilize his injuries and suppress the sword will of the 13 floors, but all of them have failed." Qin Weibai's body shook. Xia Ji nodded. "Yes, Tianzong can't do anything about the 13 floors at the moment. His body completely collapsed 10 days ago, and he is struggling on the edge of life and death. The body of the god of war is not perfect. Although the vitality it contains is much softer than that of immortality, Tianzong can only bear half of it at most. This half can help him reconstruct his body. Such a body may still seem perfect now, but it is far from the theoretical peak. Moreover, such immortality has a lot of side effects. In order to neutralize these side effects, the Wang family of Beihai has also developed several kinds of equally precious potions. Tianzong does use the body of the god of war, but it is not perfect. Now he can only accept a few tenths of a gram of the body of the god of war every day, and the remaining half is on the way. The technical bottlenecks in the body of the god of war that may be broken in the near future," she said with a wry smile. "Maybe it won't be for a long time." Qin Weibai didn't say anything. Xia Ji's words already contained a lot of things. At least one thing was certain. The body of the god of war could not break through the technical bottleneck in the near future, which meant that the Wang family of Beihai didn't have many immortality potions. At least they couldn't afford to continue the integration experiment with the immortality potions. No one knew how many immortality potions the Wang family of Beihai had wasted for this experiment. Now the stock was so scarce that it should be stuck on some precious materials. "Maybe this is the best result," Qin Weibai said softly. Qin Weibai said softly. She seemed to be sighing with emotion, yet it carried a wisp of faintly discernible deep meaning. Xiaji didn't notice it. Qin Weibai sighed softly. Summer solstice might never know that the current body of the war god should be in the most perfect state. As for the theoretical perfection that could ignore all kinds of damage, all kinds of attacks, and wantonly squander power, the Wang family of Beihai would never be able to develop it. That kind of extreme perfection and power was absolutely invincible in martial arts. The simplest point was the role of force. The role of force was mutual. Even Wang Tianzong couldn't get rid of this kind of bondage completely. If Wang Tianzong's punch and sword had thousands of kilograms of power, his body would also bear such a huge force when he attacked. That was why there were different unique skills in the dark world today. The real killing move often appeared at the most critical moment. It was not that they couldn't use the same unique skill continuously, but that their bodies couldn't bear the interactive force. What was the perfect state of the body of the god of war? The potion in this theory was too powerful. Not to mention other functions, it could directly shape the body. In terms of integrating vitality to strengthen the human body's endurance, it was almost against the natural order. If Wang Tianzong really used the perfect body of the god of war in theory, his injury would completely recover and return to the peak state, even better than before. That was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that in that state, Wang Tianzong didn't need other unique skills of the Wang family of Beihai. 6 paths of reincarnation. He only needed one move of 6 paths of reincarnation. When the body's endurance could ignore all overdraft and injuries, Wang Tianzong could use 6 paths of reincarnation dozens of times in a second. Who could bear it? That was really tearing the world apart and invincible in the world. Even moving mountains and filling seas was not a problem. Therefore, such an effect could only be theoretical after all. Such a theory had existed for hundreds of years. The most classic was in the later years of the god of war. After detailed calculations, a world-famous doctor of genetics and human biology came up with a theory of mortals becoming gods that was still talked about in the dark world. With the combat capability of the chosen one of the first generation of the god of war, after the doctor digitized everything and made detailed calculations and a lot of analysis, he said that if the body's endurance of the god of war could be increased 90 million times, then the power the god of war could exert would almost be equal to that of God. In that state, the god of war could blow up the whole planet with one punch, and sprint at full speed could even surpass the speed of light. Increasing the body's endurance of 90 million times was equal to increasing the power by hundreds of millions of times. Such a possibility did exist, but only in theory. In fact, it was impossible to achieve the perfect effect of the body of the god of war by 2 times, let alone 90 million times. The Wang family of Beihai couldn't develop such a potion. The reason why Qin Weibai understood this was that she had seen a possibility that was very close to, or even closer to, perfection than the current body of the god of war. For so many years, perhaps the Wang family of Beihai had never known what kind of energy the body of the god of war that they had developed actually was. Qin Weibai was very clear. To be exact, the energy that strengthened the body was vitality. It was far more vitality than the immortality potion could provide, enough to bring people back from the dead. To be precise, it was the dragon vein. The dragon vein of Zhongzhou State. It was not the dragon vein that Li Tianlan was carrying now. It was the dragon vein that was strong enough to protect the rise and fall of a country in the future. The vitality evolved from the huge luck could at least double the body's endurance when Li Tianlan set foot on the peak. But this was also the limit and the limit that was closest to the perfect state of the body of the god of war. As for the 2 times that the body of the god of war had been pursuing, it was simply impossible. At least within hundreds of years, such a technical bottleneck could not be broken. The Wang family of Beihai was doomed to not develop the body of the god of war they expected. There was no technology, no time, and not enough luck. Qin Weibai's eyes were a little complicated. Li Tianlan, who had the dragon vein, did not need the body of the god of war at all. So her deal with the Wang family of Beihai this time was a complete blessing. Hurried but light footsteps suddenly sounded. Horsewoman knocked on the door and whispered, "Boss, Someone from the Wang family of Beihai is here. Qin Weibai suddenly lost interest and said lazily, "Let him in." The door was pushed open. A middle-aged man with a serious and old-fashioned look came in. He solemnly held a small square box in his hands, bowed slightly to Summer Solstice, and whispered, "Madam, this is what you want." Qin Weibai's pupils contracted slightly. The small square box was completely made of alloy. It looked inconspicuous, but she knew what it was. The Wang family of Beihai trusted someone to deliver this thing, not because the delivery person was not simple, but because the box was not simple. "It's yours." Summer Solstice pushed the box in front of Qin Weibai and whispered, "Now, tell me what I want to know." "The password." Qin Weibai said calmly, "I don't dare to open this thing without the password." She looked at Summer Solstice and said with a soft smile, "The power of this thing is enough to make the blocks within a few kilometers recognize it as a dead zone." Horsewoman's face suddenly changed, and she subconsciously approached Qin Weibai. "It's useless." Qin Weibai shook her head. "Once this box explodes, even the domain of the invincible realm will be useless, not to mention you. There is a very special battery in it, which is its energy system. It is called a radioisotope battery. Horsewoman, do you know what it is?" Horsewoman's face suddenly turned pale for a moment, and she murmured, "Nuclear battery." Qin Weibai looked at Summer Solstice with a faint smile. Summer Solstice took a deep breath. She did not say the password, but opened the box herself. In the vibrant blue light, Qin Weibai checked the things, and finally took out all the things and pushed the box back. Summer Solstice answered a phone call halfway, and her eyes became a little strange. "There is news from the parliament," she said slowly. Qin Weibai studied the body of the god of war in her hand and said yes. "Ning Qianxing's appointment has been approved, but Li Tianlan will be imprisoned in the desert prison without a time limit." Summer Solstice said. Qin Weibai still said yes and simply said, "I gave him a list." "Is this your purpose?" Summer Solstice asked curiously, using the resources of the desert prison to make up for the flaws in the structure of Emperor Dong's palace. "That's a good move, really good calculation." "There are not so many calculations." Qin Weibai shook her head. "I just took advantage of the situation, that's all." Summer Solstice looked at her and was silent for a long time. "What's wrong?" Horsewoman took another box, and Qin Weibai put the body of the god of war in it and asked, "I don't know, it's an indescribable feeling." Summer Solstice shook her head. "I always thought we were the same kind of woman, but now looking at your behavior, it seems a little different. If it were me, even if Tianzong was in prison, even if I knew nothing would happen, I would see him before he left, because I would miss him in the days to come." Summer Solstice said seriously, "But you give me the feeling. You are too rational. I even suspect that you are not Qin Weibai." Horsewoman's eyes suddenly narrowed for a moment. "I am Qin Weibai." Qin Weibai said coldly. Summer Solstice looked into her eyes seriously. At this moment, what she saw in her eyes was not panic, but a kind of extremely cold anger. Summer Solstice smiled, a little playfully. "You seem to have thought of something interesting?" Qin Weibai asked. Summer Solstice smiled and shook her head. "That's a pity." Qin Weibai said faintly, "But I can remind you of one thing. You care about the survival of the Wang family of Beihai, so this matter is very meaningful." "What is it?" Summer Solstice frowned slightly. Qin Weibai gently knocked on the table and said calmly, "Did you see the Xianyuan sword on Mount Dibing?" Summer Solstice frowned and nodded. "That's why I came to you." "Did you really see it?" Qin Weibai asked softly. Her voice was very pleasant, but the slightly slow and light tone revealed a kind of inexplicable weirdness at this time. Summer Solstice's scalp went numb for no reason. Qin Weibai's voice continued, very light, very slow, and seemed to carry a chilly wind. "Did you really see it? Did you see the Xianyuan sword?" Summer Solstice's face turned blue. She looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai also looked at her. There was only depth in her perfect and dreamy eyes. The chilly wind seemed to have dissipated, but the extreme chill had penetrated into Summer Solstice's bone marrow in a short time. She suddenly understood the meaning of Qin Weibai's words. Her voice was a little dry. I saw it. Qin Weibai laughed. Summer solstice really understood. On Mount Dibing, what she saw was indeed the Xian Yuan sword. She really saw it. But the most important thing was that when she saw the Xian Yuan sword, the coldness of 9 states of the Wang family of Beihai was still on Mount Dibing. So was the sword. Where was the person? Without the person, where did the sword come from? Summer solstice finally figured out the problem she had been ignoring. She also understood why Lin Fengting wanted to say so much but stopped. She suddenly thought of the patient Lin Fengting mentioned to her at that time. She thought of the half-body of the god of war in front of her. Life and death. Her face became extremely serious in an instant. Chapter 729. The atmosphere in the restaurant suddenly became extremely depressing. Summer solstice sat stiffly in her seat, thinking about some major issues with a dignified look. Qin Weibai waved her hand. Horsewoman left with the researchers of the Wang family of Beihai. The evening wind blew in, blowing the layer of vague clouds around summer solstice, and her hair gently rose with the wind. Summer solstice came to her senses, took a deep breath, looked at Qin Weibai, and said in a low voice, "Thank you for reminding me." Qin Weibai shook her head. She knew that she had revealed a lot of things that she shouldn't have today. She didn't know whether it was right or wrong, but for the half-body of War God, it was absolutely worth it. You don't seem nervous? Qin Weibai looked at summer solstice and asked. The Wang family of Beihai has paid the price it should pay. In the face of the future, it's meaningless to be overly nervous now. Summer solstice shook her head. At this moment, she was extremely dignified and calm. I ask you for help today, but it doesn't mean that the Wang family of Beihai is a humble family. No one in the dark world dares to define us as humble. For hundreds of years, the Wang family of Beihai will give in and compromise, but no one can really make us bow our heads. Not in the future, not in Zhongzhou state. Her voice was quiet and tranquil, with unquestionable strength and calmness. She could come to see Qin Weibai for the crisis of the Wang family of Beihai, and she could wait for more than 2 hours in the alternation of night and dawn, but she would not beg on behalf of the Wang family of Beihai. This was the pride and strength of the Wang family of Beihai. She could use all means to save the crisis she could see, but it didn't mean that the Wang family of Beihai didn't have the courage to bear everything. In the simple ancestral teaching of the Wang family of Beihai, the first paragraph was the simplest, but it was this sentence that helped the Wang family of Beihai go through countless crises in hundreds of years. Believe in your own strength. In a real desperate situation, the strength that can be held in your own hands is the most effective weapon. As the descendants of the Wang family of Beihai, you should have your own persistence and courage. When you put down your persistence, it is equivalent to giving up Beihai. I hope that my descendants can remember one thing. No matter what kind of desperate situation you face, please do not give up the courage to fight. Behind you are the beautiful land and rivers of the North Sea province of 160,000 square kilometers, and the millions of people who need your protection. They will not be your burden, but the confidence of our Wang family of Beihai to challenge everything. The Wang family of Beihai would rather die in glory than live in disgrace. Summer solstice took a deep breath. She stood up. The clouds shrouding her body slowly dispersed. In the light of the restaurant, a beautiful and awe-inspiring face appeared, quiet and dignified, with inviolable coldness and pride. No matter when, the Wang family of Beihai has the courage to face all challenges. Qin Weibai leaned against the chair and was silent for a while. Then, she said calmly, I understand. This is the pride or madness of the Wang family of Beihai. This is your foundation, and it can even be said to be the key for you to get to where you are today. At present, you seem to be successful. Seems? Summer solstice frowned. No one will doubt the method to make themselves successful, at least not before they fail. Your pride is the key to your success, but it will also be the key to your fall into the abyss. I would like to hear the details. Summer solstice narrowed her eyes and looked solemn. Only Zhongzhou State. Qin Weibai's voice was extremely calm. This was originally just a deal. She was not obliged to help the Wang family of Beihai. Summer Solstice nodded. What do you think of the relationship between Zhongzhou State and Beihai now? At this stage, the game between Zhongzhou State and the north is inevitable. The game of the sea is inevitable. For hundreds of years, the Wang family of Beihai has been too aloof. Almost every president wants to let Beihai province return completely to increase the national strength of Zhongzhou State. Now, the Wang family of Beihai, which has internal and external troubles, has lost its spiritual leader. This is the best opportunity. Qin Weibai looked at Summer Solstice. The best opportunity. Not only Zhongzhou State thinks so, but everyone thinks so. Even you think that this is the biggest crisis that the Wang family of Beihai has encountered at present. This is the truth. Summer Solstice said calmly, everyone can see this clearly. Do you have any suggestions? Do you want to win? Qin Weibai asked. Of course. Summer Solstice replied without hesitation, and her tone was extremely decisive. This idea itself is wrong, Qin Weibai said calmly. Qin Weibai said indifferently, you can't win. The Wang family of Beihai has no chance of winning this game. This mentality of pursuing victory is also the pride of the Wang family of Beihai. But such pride will completely destroy the Wang family of Beihai. Don't think about winning. It's impossible. The only thing you need to do now is not to lose. This is the only advice I can give you. Why do you think that the Wang family of Beihai can't win? Summer Solstice was not angry. Her voice grew calmer. Because you are not capable enough. Qin Weibai said bluntly, this kind of ability is multifaceted. Your body is not enough to fully support the peak combat power of the Wang family of Beihai. Without Wang Tianzong, your existence can't replace Wang Tianzong's position in the hearts of the people of Beihai. Beihai does have many trump cards. With your temperament, I won't be surprised even if you really use nuclear weapons. But what you have, Zhongzhou State also has. If you really want to destroy everything, you can't do it. Most of your missiles will be intercepted before they can even enter the territory of Zhongzhou State. If it really goes to that step, the only ending for the Wang family of Beihai can only be destruction. If it really goes to that step, it will be a war. Even if Zhongzhou State can win, it can't easily have such determination. Summer Solstice said calmly. So this is the only thing you can rely on. Qin Weibai's voice was light and without the slightest anger. The only thing you can rely on is that Zhongzhou State doesn't dare to easily break out a war. This is the foundation of this game. This foundation is betting on Zhongzhou State's determination. Zhongzhou State doesn't want to do it and doesn't dare to do it at all are two different concepts. Under such circumstances, it's completely a pipe dream for you to want to win. Summer Solstice's face suddenly became a little ugly. She snorted coldly and did not speak. Retreat, or even bow your head, is your only choice. Qin Weibai said calmly, you can be strong, but your strength is based on concessions. Between strength and concessions, the Wang family of Beihai needs to find a new balance and create a new situation. Then, in this situation, you need to strive for stability, delay the situation, and drag it into a mess. This should be the limit of your ability. And then? Summer Solstice said coldly. Wang Tianzong has begun to use the body of the god of war. At that time, he should almost recover. At that time, he will naturally come out to clean up the mess. During this process, to put it bluntly, if you want to delay it, you can only delay it. Is this your speculation? Summer Solstice said tentatively. I can give you some evidence you want. Qin Weibai said calmly. Summer Solstice was in a daze. After a long time, she smiled bitterly. I'm afraid that by that time, it will be difficult for Tianzong to control the situation. Qin Weibai looked at her strangely and did not speak. I think I have another choice at the moment. Summer Solstice sat down again. The Wang family of Beihai can choose to join forces with Emperor Dong's palace. That's what you want to see, isn't it? What I hope is that Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai will not become mortal enemies, because it doesn't make sense. Qin Weibai's voice was very cold. But this is not something I can decide. I will try to persuade Tianlan. Only Tianlan can decide how the relationship between Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai will develop in the future. As for joining forces? It's impossible. At least for now, Emperor Dong's palace can't advance or retreat with the Wang family of Beihai. I can tell you clearly that before there is a clear result in the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace will not join forces with the Wang family of Beihai. A clear result, Summer Solstice muttered to herself. Qin Weibai looked at her quietly, politely and calmly. The final result, what will happen to Tianzong? After a long time, Summer Solstice asked softly. Her voice was a little trembling. I can't see the future, so I can't give you an answer. Qin Weibai said calmly. What do you think? Summer Solstice's voice was extremely persistent. Qin Weibai chuckled, but there was a flash of complexity in her eyes. She looked at Summer Solstice with some envy, some sympathy, and some melancholy. He will die. Qin Weibai said, but he will die a worthy death. He is willing. Summer Solstice's body suddenly shook for a moment. Qin Weibai stood up, looked at Summer Solstice and said, That's all for today. Goodbye. Summer Solstice silently turned around and walked out of the restaurant. Qin Weibai watched her back disappear from her sight, sat down again, and thought silently. No one knew what she was thinking about. Horsewoman came in and said softly, Boss, the sordid information has been given to her. Qin Weibai said yes, thought for a moment, and said, Where is Tianlan? The news came 5 minutes ago. The helicopter has left Yuzhou. Horsewoman said, If we go after him now, we can still intercept him. No need. Qin Weibai shook her head and said quietly, Prepare the plane. We're going to Switzerland. With the body of the god of war. Horsewoman raised her eyebrows and said, Oh. Qin Weibai walked to the window and looked at the night sky in the distance. She suddenly said, Horsewoman, what do you think a person's strongest state and strongest life will be like? Horsewoman shook her head blankly. I don't know. Probably, like Wang Tianzong? Not enough. Qin Weibai shook her head. Sword Emperor is known to be invincible in the world, but his life is too tiring after all. Even if Tianlan doesn't appear, his life is too tiring. She slowly turned around. I think of 4 words. What? Horsewoman was a little confused. No plan in this life. Qin Weibai laughed. That's probably a person's strongest life. No plan in this life, Horsewoman murmured a few times, and her eyes gradually lit up with some yearning. No plan in this life. There were only 2 kinds of people who could do this. One was a reckless man. They could be stupid and ignore any consequences. As for the other, he could completely ignore any consequences. I don't agree with Summer Solstice. Qin Weibai slowly said, They always think that even if one person can defeat the whole world, it is impossible to have the whole world. They may be right. One person really can't do it. But 2 people, it is not impossible. Qin Weibai glanced at Horsewoman and ordered, Prepare the plane. We'll leave immediately. Chapter 730. As the most mysterious and terrifying enemy in Zhongzhou State, the desert prison was a real impasse. It was the most heavily guarded place in Zhongzhou State, where the most important prisoners of Zhongzhou State were held. The prisoners in the prison were men and women, old and young, including all races. It was no exaggeration to say that every prisoner in the desert prison had a different meaning for Zhongzhou State. The prisoners here might not have committed the most heinous crimes, but they were definitely the most important ones. For example, senior spies from other countries, top-secret researchers who defected, traitors of Zhongzhou State, giants who had mastered countless secrets and were once influential in a certain field, and intelligence officers of other countries or superpowers. They would not die before their value was squeezed out. But because of their danger, Zhongzhou State would not put them in ordinary prisons. The desert prison was therefore established. It was a place where countless top criminals and conspirators gathered. Any prisoner from it, no matter who he was, at least he would not be an ordinary person. The prison was built in the center of the desert. With the prison as the center, there was no water source within hundreds of kilometers. Such a harsh terrain could almost prevent most people who tried to escape or come to raid the prison from having any idea that they should not have. At the beginning of the year, there were nearly 300 prisoners in the desert prison, but there were less than 1,000 jailers who were responsible for guarding these 300 prisoners, including 2 superiors of the Thundershocking realm and none of the half-step Invincible realm. It was known as the most heavily guarded base. This kind of power sounded incredible, but Li Tianlan knew very well how powerful and terrifying the desert prison was behind this seemingly empty defense force. In the past 60 years, after the superpowers in the Dark World had worked hard to find the location of the desert prison, they had carried out nearly 20 jailbreaking operations here. The largest one was led by an Invincible realm expert. Nearly 1,000 elites from various superpowers gathered together, and blood flowed like a river in the desert. Such a battle could be said to be a small war. However, since the establishment of the desert prison, no prisoner had succeeded in escaping, and no force had succeeded in breaking out of the prison. All the people who invaded the desert prison had never crossed the border of Zhongzhou state, or even escaped from the desert. Including the superior of the Invincible realm who had attacked the desert prison many years ago, he was eventually killed less than 30 kilometers away from the desert prison. Near the desert prison that seemed to be defenseless, there were 2 absolutely confidential military bases in Zhongzhou state. One was a fully automated reconnaissance base, and the other was a semi-automated Air Force base. The former was codenamed Sky Eye, while the latter was codenamed Sky Arrow. The Heavenly Eye was the main military base responsible for guarding the daily security of the desert prison. It was also the top reconnaissance system in Zhongzhou state. In the past 100 years, Zhongzhou state had invested a lot of money in the Heavenly Eye system. Thanks to the efforts of the first generation of researchers, the third generation of the Heavenly Eye system had been developed. Today, all the major theaters of operations in Zhongzhou state, including the Border Control Corps and Special Services, were equipped with the Heavenly Eye reconnaissance system. The Heavenly Eye system of the desert prison could be said to be the strongest among all the Heavenly Eye systems in Zhongzhou state. It was not because of the importance of the desert prison. It was because this was a desert. It was the simplest, most straightforward, and most inexplicable reason. This was a desert. Therefore, the Heavenly Eye system here was the most terrifying. The third eye was connected to most of the military satellites of Zhongzhou state with the most advanced scanning radar. In the reconnaissance mode, the reconnaissance radius of this system was nearly 200 kilometers. And this was a desert. There was no city, no neighborhood, no human habitation, only thousands of miles of yellow sand. Under such circumstances, the Heavenly Eye military base relied on the Heavenly Eye system and was equipped with countless of the most advanced firepower weapons. Laser weapons, electromagnetic weapons, infrasonic tracking cannons, demon eye bombs. Within the detection radius of the core of the Heavenly Eye, almost no creature could escape the detection of the Heavenly Eye. In the face of enemy invasion, the Heavenly Eye could automatically start all the weapon systems in the military base in a few tenths of a second. This was a real full-scale firepower. This was a desert. Without having to worry about accidental injuries or damage, the Heavenly Eye system could rely on its absolute firepower advantage to directly pour its firepower over every inch of land within 100 miles in less than a minute. No one could survive this kind of indiscriminate bombardment. Not the Invincible realm, not the peak of the Invincible realm. In the face of this unscrupulous and incessant lethality, even Wang Tianzong in the Eastern Europe period could not survive. No matter how strong the Invincible realm was, there was a limit. And in this kind of unrestricted terrain, modern heavy firepower weapons had the majesty to sanction everything. Even if the Heavenly Eye system failed and the fish that escaped the net left this range, the elite air force of the Sky Arrow base could deal with all the sudden situations in the fastest time. With the existence of 2 military bases, the defense of the desert prison was completely unsolvable. Among all the military bases in Zhongzhou state, the base of the desert prison might have the least number of people, but its destructive power could be said to be the strongest. The warden of the desert prison was also the highest officer of the two military bases and had the highest authority, so he had always been awarded the rank of lieutenant general. Their strength might not be the best, but in the desert, the warden of the prison was the real master, even the only master. The helicopter whistled over the yellow sand in the heat wave. In the distance was a desolate and vast desert. The outline of the prison was faintly visible. Li Tianlan looked quietly into the distance and suddenly asked, "Who is the warden of the desert prison now?" "Lieutenant General Xiao Mahai." Dongqing Wudi said, "A few months ago, he came to the army headquarters to report to me." Li Tianlan thought about it and shook his head. "I haven't heard of him." Dongqing Wudi and Yi Dongxing looked at each other and smiled helplessly. Not only Li Tianlan hadn't heard of him, but even Dongqing Wudi, who had just met him a few months ago, might not have remembered Xiao Mahai's name if he hadn't checked the information before coming. There was no doubt about the powerful defense of the desert prison. The authority of the warden of the desert prison to dominate this desert was also beyond doubt. But for any warden, even for any general in Zhongzhou state, the position of the warden was not a good one. This position was generally assigned to the place where the general was excluded by the major groups, failed in the competition for a key position, or offended someone. There was no future, no benefits, and it was a deserted place. Any word used here was truly appropriate. He managed hundreds of prisoners with special identities who could not be treated casually, and no one came to visit him. He led nearly 1,000 miscellaneous soldiers who had no combat power at all. He stayed in the prison all year round to bask in the sun and eat sand. He also had to regularly accept the strict examination from the army headquarters, the Ministry of State Security, and Kunlun City. He guarded a pile of high-tech weapons that ran all year round but were basically unused. Every year, in order to maintain the funds for the operation of the base, he had to go to the army headquarters from time to time to pretend to be a grandson. This was the warden of the lieutenant general level of the desert prison. Who the hell wanted to be such a warden? This kind of position, with the rank of general, was not even as comfortable as most of the grassroots officers. There was no doubt that in the hearts of the generals of Zhongzhou state, the position of the warden of the desert prison was the most difficult general-level position in the whole Zhongzhou state. It would be good if such a person was not regarded as a joke. Who could remember his name? "Minister, I want a copy of this person's detailed information." Li Tianlan thought for a moment and said softly, "No problem." Dongqing Wudi nodded. "I'll ask someone to extract the file." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and looked thoughtfully at the desert prison that was getting closer and closer. In the eyes of others, the warden of the desert prison might be the most difficult position, but to him, this position was extraordinary. To him, this warden could even be said to be the most valuable person he would come into contact with in the next period of time. Chapter 731. The helicopter landed slowly in front of the gate that looked a little old in the desert prison. Xiao Mahai, the warden, and two deputy wardens greeted them with some middle-level staff in the prison. The desert was full of wind and sand. The yellow sand was raging, almost bending the warden's waist. The rank of lieutenant general of Zhongzhou state shone under the scorching sun. The warden, who looked nearly 60 years old, stooped and trotted all the way. His speed in the thunder-shocking realm almost left the two deputies and others behind. But Xiao Mahai seemed to be unaware of it. When he was still far away from the helicopter, he had already stretched out his hands with a smile on his face, looking humble and respectful. "Hello, Minister Dongqing. Welcome to the desert for inspection." Dongqing Wudi smiled indifferently and shook hands with him casually. This kind of lieutenant general, who had an empty military rank but could hardly play any role, was indeed not taken seriously by him. He pulled out his hand, looked calm, and said righteously, "General Xiao, I'm not here to inspect the work. Yesterday, there was a vicious case of extermination in Yuzhou City. Li Tianlan, the former marshal of the Special Warfare System, is a major suspect in the case. The parliament decided to imprison Li Tianlan in the desert prison. I'm here to escort the suspect. The desert prison is your territory. The suspect has been sent here." I hope you can fulfill your duty and keep a close watch on him. If anything goes wrong, Zhongzhou State will hold you responsible. Do you understand? Yes, Minister, I understand. Xiao Mahai seemed to want to salute, but he felt awkward when he raised his palm halfway. During the 3 years as the warden of the desert prison, everything he had encountered had almost completely crushed his arrogance and strength of character. He laughed at himself, put down his palm, and kept nodding and bowing to Dongqing Wudi skillfully and naturally. Dongqing Wudi nodded and patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder. This is Li Tianlan, the suspect I'm going to escort this time. Xiao Mahai quickly looked up at Li Tianlan. This was his first feeling. Ordinary. This was his second feeling. Extraordinary. When the third feeling appeared, all his impressions suddenly solidified. He was extraordinary. The young man, who had been a marshal and was now a prisoner, stood beside Dongqing Wudi. His eyes were calm and deep, but he stood there without any sense of existence. Under the scorching sun and the raging sandstorm, he stood there like an illusory shadow. But once Xiao Mahai's attention was focused on him, this illusory shadow suddenly became extremely real. Under that seemingly ordinary appearance, Xiao Mahai felt an indescribable peerless elegance. It was an indescribable feeling. Xiao Mahai could not describe it. He was just standing there, but he had fused with the whole world in the unseen world. Li Tianlan took the initiative to extend his hand and said quietly, "Hello, General Xiao." "Hello, Your Highness." "Welcome, Your Highness." No, Your Highness, that's not what I meant." "Hello, Your Highness, hello." Xiao Mahai's smile grew brighter, but halfway through his words, his face suddenly changed. Facing Li Tianlan, he didn't know how to phrase his words. His head was covered in sweat, and his waist seemed to be clockwork as he kept bowing to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan smiled and seemed to find it interesting. Xiao Mahai became more and more nervous, and his hand holding Li Tianlan trembled slightly. Although he was sent to the desert prison, he was still a lieutenant general of Zhongzhou State. And as the warden, how could he not know the details of the prisoners he was about to lock up? Before Li Tianlan came to the prison, Xiao Mahai had already known Li Tianlan's details through the outside world. He also roughly understood the reason why he came to the desert prison. To be honest, the moment he saw Li Tianlan's information, Xiao Mahai's scalp was a little numb, and his heart sank to the bottom. Before he was sent here, Li Tianlan's name had already been famous in Zhongzhou State. But at that time, Li Tianlan was just an extremely talented young man who was the successor of the Li family. For more than 3 years, Xiao Mahai was discouraged and didn't pay much attention to the outside world. At this time, when he looked at Li Tianlan's information again, he found that the outside world had already changed dramatically. Li Tianlan was still very young. But no one saw him as a young man with a bright future. He had never entered the Invincible Realm, but he had killed more than one Invincible Realm expert. He led the Snowdance Corps to conquer 5 countries in Eastern Europe, became the Palace Lord of Emperor East's Palace, established Xianyuan City, swept away the Wang family of Beihai, and was even likely to become the master of Tiannan in the future. Such a figure was now strongly supported by the giant group. Even Wei Kunlun of Mount Shu had joined the Samsara Palace in a high-profile manner. He couldn't afford to offend him. This was the first thought that came to Xiao Mahai's mind when he saw Li Tianlan's information. Such a Li Tianlan was definitely not a figure he could afford to offend. After learning about Li Tianlan's past, he also understood why Li Tianlan appeared here. In this way, he was even more frightened. He killed Shi Mulin's family, but he was taken as a suspect and escorted to the desert prison. Just by the identity of the suspect, Xiao Mahai smelled countless knives and swords. He had committed such a serious crime, but he was still only a suspect. Obviously, some people in Zhongzhou State wanted to deal with the case strictly, but there were also people who wanted to protect Li Tianlan. In the case that neither side could do anything to the other for the time being, they each took a step back, so Li Tianlan became a suspect. The moment he figured out this problem, Xiao Mahai had already decided his attitude toward Li Tianlan. He had to accept it. He had to accept it, but he couldn't treat him as an ordinary prisoner. If he did so, he would offend the giant group first. And in Xiao Mahai's view, Li Tianlan came to the desert prison only for a temporary period. It could even be said that he came to avoid the limelight. Such a figure, the future heavenly son, Li Tianlan could be said to be the general trend. It was impossible for such a figure to be trapped in the desert prison until he died. After 3 or 5 months, at most a year or two, when the limelight passed, Li Tianlan would go out. After he went out, naturally, it would be a situation of boundless sea and sky. How could Xiao Mahai offend such a person to death? How dare he offend him to death? Worship him. Worship him as an ancestor. General Xiao seems to be too nervous. Yi Dongxing, who was beside him, smiled. Xiao Mahai was stunned and then noticed the god of army of Zhongzhou state. He narrowed his eyes and nodded, saying, "Hello, General Yi." To Dongqing Wudi he used honorifics. To Li Tianlan, the suspect, he called him Your Highness, nodded and bowed, and also used honorifics. To Yi Dongxing, his tone was extremely calm, even indifferent. Yi Dongxing raised his eyebrows, smiled indifferently, and didn't say much. He could understand Xiao Mahai's hostility and his excessive enthusiasm for Dongqing Wudi and Li Tianlan. In fact, the reason why Xiao Mahai was sent to the desert prison was the result of the game between the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. Before he was transferred to the desert prison, Xiao Mahai was the commander of a group army in Zhongzhou state. That group army might not be the trump card of Zhongzhou state, but in the main force, it had always ranked first. Xiao Mahai himself did not have a strong backer. He could serve as the commander of that group army. First, his strength close to the peak of the thundershocking realm made him qualified. Second, under the special background, all parties couldn't reach a good result after weighing the pros and cons, so they could only send Xiao Mahai to make the transition. More than 3 years ago, Xiao Mahai actually wanted to get close to the giant group and took action. He made positive comments on the Border Control Corps many times in public. At that time, it was almost certain that Dongqing Wudi would leave the Border Control Corps and enter the main army headquarters. The internal game in the military was extremely fierce. Xiao Mahai used all means to merge the group army he led into the Border Control Corps. In this way, he officially stepped onto the big ship of the giant group. Although he didn't see Dongqing Wudi at that time, he also visited many big shots of the giant group and got relatively positive responses. However, when his operation was about to succeed, a major general of the Southeast Group came out of nowhere and directly took away his position. All of Xiao Mahai's dreams were completely shattered, and he was transferred to the desert prison. It wasn't that the giant group didn't fight for this matter, but in the end, it was no match for the Southeast Group. In addition, Xiao Mahai himself wasn't a direct descendant of the giant group, and Dongqing Wudi had to pay a lot of bargaining chips to get the position. At that time, the giant group, whose biggest demand was to let Dongqing Wudi enter the army headquarters, naturally wouldn't be too insistent. That was why Xiao Mahai had gone through so many ups and downs in the past 3 years. As one of the leaders of the Southeast Group, Xiao Mahai naturally didn't have a good impression of Yi Dongxing. He didn't even bother to keep up appearances. As a lieutenant general, he already had the worst treatment in the desert. How bad could it be? No matter how powerful Yi Dongxing was, could he beat him to the end? Even if he did, it would be a good thing for Xiao Mahai. In the past 3 years, Xiao Mahai could be said to have suffered enough. If he could leave this damn place, even if he had to take off his military uniform, he would consider it. Now, the arrival of Li Tianlan was undoubtedly a turning point. This made Xiao Mahai see an opportunity, a huge opportunity, a chance to make a comeback. Li Tianlan had the full support of the giant group. When he was in the desert prison, the eyes of the giant group would inevitably focus on the desert prison, and by the way, they would pay attention to him, the lieutenant general of Zhongzhou state who once wanted to get close to the giant group. As long as he served Li Tianlan well, when Li Tianlan left the prison, he had a great chance to be taken out by Li Tianlan. Xiao Mahai never belittled himself. In the desert prison, he was a grandson. But when he left here, his strength, which was close to the peak of the thundershocking realm, was enough for him to play on any occasion. Moreover, it was the cooperation between the giant group and the Southeast Group to protect Li Tianlan this time. If Li Tianlan was willing to take him away, the southeast group might not stop him. In this way, as long as Li Tianlan was satisfied, his affairs would be promising. General Xiao, you're too polite. I'm a prisoner. In the future, I'll have to rely on you to take care of me in the prison. Li Tianlan said with a smile, his tone clear and light. Of course I will. Rest assured, Your Highness. If you have any needs, I promise to meet them. Xiao Mahai wiped the sweat on his forehead and glanced at Li Tianlan. The two of them looked at each other slightly and were deeply satisfied with each other's attitude. This seemed to be a good start. That was what both of them thought. However, Xiao Mahai thought about the beginning of his comeback. Li Tianlan thought about the beginning of the rapid maturity of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan chuckled and held Xiao Mahai's hand with more strength. Your Highness, please. Xiao Mahai bowed deeply, his posture becoming more and more respectful. Chapter 732. The area of the desert prison was neither too big nor too small, but it was more than 300 acres in the desert. It looked very majestic, like a small city that had suffered the vicissitudes of life. Under the leadership of Xiao Mahai, Dongqing Wudi and Yi Dongsheng personally accompanied Li Tianlan into the desert prison. That was to accompany. Under the common interests, even Yi Dongsheng, who did not get along with Li Tianlan, showed a smile and a very peaceful attitude. Such a move made Xiao Mahai more sure of his guess. Li Tianlan's coming to the desert prison was just that both sides of the game took a step back for the time being. It was far from the time to decide the outcome. The giant group and the southeast group joined hands and advanced and retreated together. In such a situation, even if the other four groups joined hands, it was impossible to uproot the southeast group and the giant group, not to mention that the other side of the game was just the academics and the prince group. As long as the two groups were not completely extinct, they would always have a way to let Li Tianlan out. Xiao Mahai could climb to the position of lieutenant general because he had seen too many similar things, so he knew Li Tianlan's situation very well. The outcome of the game between the four groups was still uncertain, but Li Tianlan could be said to be in an invincible position. At least he would not be trapped in the desert prison. Xiao Mahai could be completely sure of this. The interior of the desert prison was a semi-closed and semi-open building. After entering the gate and passing through a 100-meter-long passage full of various weapons, the first place to enter was the dormitory where the prison staff lived. There was a canteen between the dormitory and the prison. After passing the canteen, it was the place where the prisoners lived. There were extremely narrow corridors full of rooms, but most of them were empty. The prisoners were far away from each other. Li Tianlan looked at the narrow and winding corridor in front of him, and a very familiar expression appeared in his eyes. The entire prisoner area was a huge and complicated maze. The maze he walked through in the first half of the entrance maneuver when he entered the Sky Academy was a simplified version of the present maze. Where is my room? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Xiao Mahai hesitated and glanced at Yi Dongsheng. Yi Dongsheng smiled and said nothing, keeping his composure. Xiao Mahai smiled and said in a steady voice, Your Highness's room is not here. During the time you are here, Your Highness, please live in my room. I have had it cleaned before you came. It's clean and I promise Your Highness will be satisfied. This treatment is really different. Prisoners come to prison, but they live in the warden's room. Interesting. Dongqing Wudi laughed and patted Xiao Mahai on the shoulder, but he did not show any displeasure. On the contrary, he looked extremely satisfied. Xiao Mahai's room and office were corpses. As a lieutenant general of Zhongzhou State, no matter how down and out he was, he still had the power to create a luxurious enough residence for himself in this remote place. Although Li Tianlan had to stay in the desert prison during this time, how could Dongqing Wudi really let Xiao Mahai lock him up in the prisoner area? Li Tianlan's current status was completely different from when he first came here a few years ago. He had intended to talk some sense into Xiao Mahai, but Xiao Mahai was so sensible that he even gave up his room. The warden's room had direct control over all the weapon systems in the prison. Xiao Mahai's decision showed how firm his position was. Dongqing Wudi glanced at Yi Dongsheng. Yi Dongxing's smile remained unchanged and he said politely, "It seems that General Xiao has to suffer." Xiao Mahai didn't even look at Yi Dongxing. He just kept bowing to Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "It's your highness who has to suffer. The conditions are simple. I hope your highness won't be offended." "You're welcome, General." Li Tianlan shook his head and looked at the endless maze corridor in front of him. He suddenly said, "Let's just walk around. Your highness has the final say." Xiao Mahai said without hesitation and pressed a button on the wall. A subtle light flashed in the corridor. In everyone's sight, the doors in the narrow corridor became transparent. Standing in the corridor, Li Tianlan could clearly see what was going on inside through the doors. At the same time, countless letters and numbers appeared in the corridor. In the corridor in front of Li Tianlan, the A1 sign lit up. This represented the entrance to the maze. In this extremely complicated maze, the staff usually walked back and forth according to this number. All the rooms at the entrance to the maze were empty, and there were no prisoners. Li Tianlan shook his head and didn't look at the number in front of him. He walked along the corridor. His movements were casual and a little careless. But the deeper he went, the more frightened Xiao Mahai was. Because the route Li Tianlan chose was too coincidental. He completely ignored the wall number as a reminder and walked forward at will. But he took the shortest route and could observe the most prisoners. If he walked along this route, Li Tianlan could almost see the situation of most prisoners. At the same time, he could also approach a square at the end of the prisoner area, which was used for prisoners to take a breather. Simple and clear. The so-called maze was completely useless under his feet. This kind of familiarity had almost penetrated into his bones. At this moment, Xiao Mahai even felt that Li Tianlan was the warden here, and he was like a tour behind him. "Minister," Xiao Mahai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Dongqing Wudi smiled and looked at Li Tianlan, who was walking forward. His eyes were a little complicated with a touch of guilt. He whispered, "Tianlan has been here before and lived here for a whole year." Xiao Mahai was stunned. Yi Dongxing was also stunned. He turned his head and glanced at Dongqing Wudi meaningfully. About 5 or 6 years ago, a trusted major general of the Dongqing clan was suddenly sent to the desert prison to serve as the deputy warden, and it was arranged by Dongqing Wudi himself. The major general, who was considered a rising star in the giant group, suddenly had a bleak future. Before that, he was deeply trusted by Dongqing Wudi. At that time, no one knew why Dongqing Wudi made this choice, and many people even speculated that the rising star had betrayed the Dongqing clan. Yi Dongxing paid special attention to this matter. Later, the major general stayed in the desert prison for more than a year, and then he was transferred to the Border Control Corps. He left the Border Control Corps 2 years ago and was promoted to lieutenant general. Now he was the deputy commander of the Zhongzhou Eastern Theater of Operations and the commander of an ace army. He might even be promoted to general in a few years. His future was extremely bright. The more it was like this, the more Yi Dongxing couldn't understand why Dongqing Wudi sent him to the desert prison at that time. Li Tianlan had stayed in the desert prison for a year? Would it be the same as a few years ago? Did it have anything to do with that strange transfer? "I've lived here more than once." Li Tianlan, who was walking in front, suddenly opened his mouth. His voice was very quiet, with a kind of calmness as if he had experienced countless things. "No matter now or in the future, this place will be my most impressive enemy. During that year, I experienced a lot of things here." His voice became low, and there seemed to be a trace of trembling in his calmness. "I'll never forget it." "For example? What did your highness experience here?" Yi Dongxing asked curiously. He was really curious about this question. This question meant many things. If Li Tianlan's coming here had something to do with the strange transfer of the rising star in the giant group 5 or 6 years ago, then it meant that the engagement between the Dongqing clan and the Li family did not start after the Dongqing clan saw Li Tianlan's potential, but earlier, the two sides had a very close cooperation. In order to enter the desert prison, Dongqing Wudi even let his confidant waste more than a year's time to escort Li Tianlan. One could imagine what this meant. Moreover, Yi Dongxing suddenly remembered that during that time, Dongqing Hongguang's adopted son, Thunder God, who was deeply trusted by Dongqing Wudi, was also missing. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy Yi Dongqing was. He couldn't see what was worth Dongqing Wudi's trouble in the desert prison. The prisoners here were undoubtedly very important and valuable, and there were many real old foxes and martial arts masters among them. But the process of retrieving prisoners from the desert prison was extremely complicated. Moreover, Kunlun City, the Ministry of State Security, and the General Staff Headquarters would come here regularly for strict examination. If Dongqing Wudi secretly took away any prisoners, there was no reason that Yi Dongqing, who had been in charge of the General Staff Headquarters for many years, did not know. If it was not for prisoners, then for what? A lot. Li Tianlan glanced at Yi Dongqing and said blandly, a lot. So far, the most desperate, fearful, helpless, depressed, crazy, and closest to death days of my life have been spent here. A shadow flashed in his eyes. Since he entered the secular world, he had experienced many things. In the final battle in Heaven Capital, he was pierced in the heart by a sword. In the trial day in Eastern Europe, if there was no deity's sword energy, he would have no hope of survival. But among many things, only when he was here did he really feel the most thorough despair and fear that had almost penetrated into his soul. And it was not only once. In that year, it lasted for nearly 3 days and 3 nights. Again and again, his spirit was completely tortured by despair and fear and completely collapsed. In the collapse, he stubbornly became rational, and then collapsed and reorganized again. In those days, Li Tianlan peed his pants, scratched his scalp, and bit off his own flesh and blood. That year, he was only 17 years old. When he was at his weakest, he experienced the deepest despair and fear. He survived the situation where he should not have survived and became the Li Tianlan of today, the heavenly son of today. The desert prison had given him countless things in that year. And the most precious thing was the willpower that had been tempered in countless times of despair and fear. That kind of willpower could even surpass the heavenly king heart. It could be said to be truly invincible, as hard as gold, as hard as a rock. That was the most precious treasure he had ever obtained. Chapter 733. At the end of the maze was a square. Compared with the thousands of miles of yellow sand outside, there was at least a flat road in the square. The square was not big, but it looked extremely empty. There were a few basketball racks, a miniature football field, and a few table tennis tables scattered in it. Apart from that, there was nothing else. The prison's control of prisoners was not too strict. Everything in the square was entertainment facilities for prisoners. Of course, there was a strict time limit, an average of 2 hours a day. When Li Tianlan and the others walked into the square, the break time had passed. The square looked extremely desolate. Li Tianlan walked around the track in silence and finally came to a corner. The corner was covered with yellow sand. A hole slightly larger than the dog hole was covered by a pile of weeds. It looked bottomless. Li Tianlan stood in front of the hole, narrowed his eyes, and said nothing. Xiao Mahai's face changed. Dongqing Wudi's expression was solemn. Yi Dongqing was a little confused. It is said that when the desert prison was first established, the plan was to build the prison underground. Li Tianlan looked at the hole in front of him and said in a flat voice, "The military gave a detailed topographic map and did a site survey. In theory, a large military prison could be built about 80 meters underground, just like the 2 nearby military bases." No one spoke. The 2 military bases, Sky Eye and Sky Arrow, were built under the yellow sand around the desert prison. Everyone present knew this. It's just that the terrain of the prison is very complicated. When the construction was almost completed, the military found that the structure of the underground prison was a little unstable. If they wanted to strengthen it, they had to pay a lot of money. At that time, there was a big accident in the construction of the prison. After the parliament held a meeting to consider and study the construction cost, they decided to give up the plan of the underground prison, so the desert prison was placed on the ground. Li Tianlan took 2 steps forward and said lightly, "In fact, there is no difference. This prison is a real dangerous place, whether it is on the ground or underground. Your Highness is right. Xiao Mahai smiled apologetically. Later, many years after the prison was built and put into use, a fugitive who wanted to escape accidentally found this hole. This hole can lead directly to the almost completed underground prison. General Xiao knows this story, right? It's recorded in the files. Xiao Mahai nodded respectfully. He was the second invincible realm expert in the prison's hundreds of years of history. He opened this passage quietly and tried to escape. 3 hours after the break time ended, the prison found him. In the next hour, the prison found this hole. The invincible realm expert escaped. Yi Dongxing raised his eyebrows. His authority was enough for him to view all the information about the desert prison. However, who would be interested in seeing the history of the desert prison? Yi Dongxing didn't know about this at all. No, he's crazy. Xiao Mahai said faintly. He entered the underground prison. On the 13th hour, his mind completely collapsed and he lost control of his power. After an extreme madness, he died inside. From then on, the tunnel became smaller and smaller. At first, people could walk upright in the tunnel, but now. Li Tunlan was silent for a while and carefully recalled the feeling at that time. Probably only enough for people to crawl inside. They can't even raise their bodies. For a moment, Yi Dongxing didn't. He came to his senses and asked subconsciously, "What's inside?" Xiao Mahai smiled. Li Tianlan also smiled. Inside, he opened his mouth softly with the color of memory. The underground prison is basically the same as the prison now. It's also a maze, and there's nothing in the maze. There was nothing. This was the truth. Yi Dongxing froze for a moment and then understood. His scalp suddenly went numb. There was nothing. He couldn't help taking a step forward and looking at the seemingly endless dark hole in front of him. The muscles at the corners of his eyes kept twitching. This was really just a hole that people could barely get in. Because of the geology, the deeper it was, the smaller the space inside was, and even many places had been completely blocked. Even if the invincible realm expert planned to escape from here at the beginning, the space inside would be bigger, but there was still nothing. Yi Dongxing could imagine that there was only darkness and silence, as well as the countless twists and turns that seemed to have no end. That kind of loneliness and fear would be magnified thousands of times in absolute darkness and silence, turning into despair. Therefore, even the invincible realm expert who escaped from the prison didn't last long. In the 13th hour, he went crazy. He was completely tortured by this silence and darkness to the point of mental breakdown, and finally died on the constantly repeating path. Yi Dongxing couldn't help but glance at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan said that he had experienced the most desperate and frightening time here. Vaguely, he seemed to understand something. I crawled in from here? Li Tianlan said quietly, I crawled into the darkness like this. It was very narrow inside, and I could only maintain a kind of ability to crawl forward. I tried to climb up, but I couldn't lie down. The sand around me would constantly fall, just like being buried alive. There were many places inside where there were no roads. I could only rely on my own hands to open the way, so it was very exhausting. But I had no food or water. Even if I had, I didn't dare to eat, and I didn't have the mood to eat. I couldn't see anything there, and the only thing I could hear was my heartbeat, which was getting faster and faster. That kind of depression, congestion, darkness, and silence tortured me crazy again and again. Well, I said crazy, but in there, I couldn't even take a deep breath. I was sweating all the time, and it seemed like I was bleeding. That kind of fear and suffocation affected my reason. I went the wrong way again and again, and even scared myself to tears many times. At that time, I really thought I couldn't get out, and I thought so many times. Yi Dongxing's face was a little pale. He didn't know whether he felt the same or something else. Cold sweat flowed down his forehead, and his tone was very cautious. How long did you persist? I didn't persist. Dongcheng Wudi interrupted Yi Dongxing's words in a hoarse voice. Tianlan had been moving inside at that time. He went in from here and finally found the exit at the other end. The whole process took 70 hours and 56 minutes. When he climbed out, he was severely dehydrated, and there were scratches all over his body, and one of his fingers was almost bitten off. But at that time, his mind was still clear. Li Tianlan didn't speak. He looked at the hole in front of him, expressionless, and his eyes were full of coldness. Whether it was Xiao Mahai or Yi Dongxing, their faces all changed. 70 hours and 56 minutes. In that kind of environment that could drive an invincible realm expert completely crazy in more than 10 hours, Li Tianlan struggled for more than 70 hours. And it was not the current Li Tianlan. It was the Li Tianlan of that year. Yi Dongxing could imagine the depression and fear in that kind of environment. But he couldn't imagine what kind of madness and despair Li Tianlan had experienced after experiencing all this. The corner of his mouth moved as if he wanted to say something, but for a moment, he couldn't say anything. Li Tianlan stood there quietly, as if he was lost in thought. But for the first time, Yi Dongxing felt the power from this figure. His eyes were looking up. 70 hours. Yi Dongxing couldn't do it. In this narrow passage now, he didn't even dare to say that he could hold on for 70 minutes. The key was that under such circumstances, Li Tianlan was not static. He was acting, thinking, and looking for the right route. Such 70 hours were enough to temper a person's collapsed spirit to a level that no one could imagine. Yi Dongxing bowed slightly to Li Tianlan. He was the god of war and also a martial artist. This was the first time he felt the aura of a strong man from Li Tianlan. At this moment, what he respected was not Li Tianlan, but the almost inhuman will. Before I leave, I will walk through this passage again. Li Tianlan said slowly, "No, I will leave directly from here." All the shadows in his eyes disappeared, and he became calm and confident. "Let everyone see it again." Dongxing Wudi sighed softly, but he didn't know what to say. Li Tianlan raised his head and looked at the sky. The sun in the sky shone on every corner of the square. But there was no sand or wind in the square. A thin barrier enveloped the entire square, isolating it from the outside world and this place at the same time. Li Tianlan didn't speak, just looking at the sun in the sky. Through the edge of the shield, the sky in the distance was pure blue. There was no shadow in the clear sky, and it was extremely quiet. The world was quiet. "Minister, please go back." Li Tianlan turned around and looked at Dongxing Wudi with a smile. "It's good here. I'm very satisfied. I really need such a place to think about something seriously." Dongxing Wudi took a deep look at him, nodded, and said, "Okay. During my time here, Emperor Dong's palace and Rushi have troubled you, minister." Li Tianlan continued. Dongxing Wudi shook his head slightly and asked, "Anything else?" Li Tianlan thought for a moment and raised his palm. There was a buzzing sound in the air. An extremely delicate and ghastly small black sword appeared in Li Tianlan's hand. The small sword rotated around Li Tianlan, as if it was reluctant to part with him. Li Tianlan flicked the blade of the Xianyuan sword and said calmly, "Minister, please bring this to Little Bai." Dongxing Wudi held out his hand. Li Tianlan glanced at the Xianyuan sword. The Xianyuan sword trembled and fell into Dongxing Wudi's hand obediently. Li Tianlan said no more and sent Dongxing Wudi and Yi Dongxing out of the prison. Under the clear sky, there was endless yellow sand. He stood in the flying yellow sand, watching the helicopter gradually take off and go further and further away. For a long time, he didn't move and kept watching, as if looking at his future and the Great Way. End of Volume 5. Chapter 734. It was raining in Qingzhou. The rain of early autumn kept falling. In the autumn world, it was empty and quiet. There was no morning or sunset under the gloomy sky. When she opened her eyes, the sky was still gray. The dense water lines kept falling, reflecting in her pupils like streams of light, cold and illusory. Her eyes went from blank to sober, and then she felt a little disappointed. She slowly sat up from the bed. The white blanket slid off her body, revealing her snow-white and soft shoulders. It seemed a little cold. She hugged her shoulders with both hands, bent her knees against the back of the bed, and looked at the autumn rain outside the window. She was in a daze and was silent for a long time. Autumn was a season that could easily affect people's moods. The impact was neither good nor bad. It was not a clear feeling, but it always made people feel strange. The autumn rain was falling. The autumn leaves danced in the wind and rain and fell again. She looked through the window silently, and her heart was a little complicated. It was longing, concern, melancholy, and reluctance. She sat in a daze for a long time until the alarm clock rang. She slowly got out of bed and put on her pajamas. She could vaguely hear the laughter of young people downstairs, carefree and carefree. She glanced down. The students who went to school had already walked out of their homes. A new day had begun, but it was still a little strange. The continuous autumn rain beat on the entire Qingzhou city, and her eyes became calm. This rain, this season, suddenly made her feel a little homesick. But she already did not know where her home was. She did not know, so she simply did not want to think about it. She took a light breath, turned around, and walked into the bathroom. She brushed her teeth and washed her face, and methodically made herself a simple breakfast. Then she took out a very ordinary black professional suit from the empty wardrobe and changed into it. After all the preparation work was done, there were still 20 minutes before the departure time. She poured herself a glass of warm water, sipped it, and prepared for the interview. Yes, the interview. It was something she had never done before, at least not a month ago. In a month's time, she went to 4 cities and submitted nearly 12 resumes to different companies. After going through 6 interviews, after serious consideration, she rejected 5 of the offers and finally chose Qingzhou. Qingzhou was a very ordinary inland city, medium in scale and relatively backward in development. There were no mountains, rivers, or seas in the whole city, not even any landmark enterprises. The only advantage was probably that it was very comfortable and the pace of life was relatively slow. Such cities were everywhere in Zhongzhou State, and there was nothing noteworthy at all. She rented a house here for $1,000 a month. She rented it for half a year, and then chose a small foreign trade company. She passed the first interview, and today she participated in the second interview. His phone suddenly rang. It wasn't a phone call but an app notification. The deputy governor of Beihai Province, Chen Wanxing, has been placed on file for investigation by the Beihai Ministry of Supervision for serious violations of discipline. Her eyes were calm and gentle, without the slightest fluctuation. She just quietly drank the warm water and carried a lady's backpack out of the house. There was a brand new electric scooter in the corridor. She touched the electric scooter and looked out the window at the autumn rain. She wrinkled her nose and thought about it. In the end, she gave up and booked a taxi online. When the taxi stopped in front of her, she opened the door and got in. Her voice was clear and quiet as she said softly, "To the Susui Trading Building." The Susui Trading Building really wasn't big. The 5-story office building looked quite old. This was the headquarters of the Susui Trading Group. This company didn't stand out in the whole country, but in Qingzhou, it was second to none. Every time there was an open recruitment, the competition for the positions was fierce. To some extent, those who could pass the first round of interviews and enter the second interview basically had their own merits. But now, looking at the resumes on the table and the people who were going to participate in the second interview, He Yishui's impatience was practically written on her face. He Yishui was the CEO of the Susui Trading Group. She was 31 years old and had just gotten divorced last year. In the entire trading circle of Qingzhou, she was a rather famous career woman. In the recent second interview, one of the positions to be recruited was for her special assistant. She had been looking forward to it, but she hadn't expected that all the candidates she saw would be of this standard. 8 candidates were competing for 4 positions, 3 men and 5 women. He Yishui remembered very clearly that 2 of the male candidates had said their names wrong when they introduced themselves, and the other one was stammering. He Yishui couldn't understand what he was talking about even after talking for a long time. And a few of the female candidates were obviously distracted. One of them had said the wrong college she had graduated from. The entire process of the second interview was a complete disaster in He Yishui's eyes. It was a mess. It wasn't easy for her to get past the 5 candidates. Her heart had completely disappeared. When the fifth candidate walked out of the conference room, she couldn't help but stand up and say, "I still have something to do. I'll take my leave first." "So don't worry. From their resumes, they seem pretty good." A middle-aged deputy CEO smiled and said softly, "Pretty good." He raised her eyebrows. She was undoubtedly a very beautiful woman. She was in her early 30s, which was the most beautiful period of a woman. Mature, elegant, and calm. It was just that her entire aura seemed a little too fierce when she was working, so much so that it diluted her originally good looks. "I can't see what's good about these people." "Oh, except for their resumes. I don't even know how they passed the first round of interviews." "Who was in charge of the first round of interviews? I need an explanation." He-Shui's voice was filled with undisguised displeasure. "I was in charge of the first round of interviews." The middle-aged deputy CEO who had spoken just now smiled and said, "Xiu, the performance of those people just now wasn't very good, but it's understandable. Their state today is really a little unjust." He-Shui raised her eyebrows. "I said that there was a candidate in the second round today who had a very good image." The deputy CEO chuckled with obvious appreciation and even amazement in his eyes. "Very, very good. These people's mentality is probably affected." He-Shui knew about this. Part of the reason why she came here today was also because of this. But if it was said that the image of the competitors had caused the mentality of those candidates to be out of balance, she inevitably felt a little ridiculous. Is it so exaggerated? How good can the image be? The resumes are on the table. You have also seen the photos. The deputy CEO said calmly, "Xiu, please sit for a while. I promise that you will be satisfied with this candidate." He-Shui thought for a moment, sat down slowly, and flipped through the last resume. There was a very formal 1-inch photo on the resume. The young woman in the photo did have bright eyes and white teeth. But through this simple and formal 1-inch photo, what she could see was really limited. She shook her head and said, "Directly invite this candidate in." The deputy CEO nodded and turned on the loudspeaker beside him. At this moment, even his voice unconsciously became soft. "Number 6, Li Mutong." He-Shui quickly lowered her head and looked at the resume again. Li Mutong, female, 23 years old, graduated from the finance department of Beihai University. Work experience, none. Intended position, clerk. She raised her eyebrows and raised her head. The glass door of the conference room was pushed open. A tall and slim figure walked in. He-Shui's eyes flashed a touch of astonishment, and then she was completely stunned. She didn't even hear the smile on the other side's face. The deputy CEO said that the candidate had a good image. Only when she saw Li Mutong in person did He-Shui understand what this sentence meant. Exquisite short hair, beautiful face, clean eyes, simple dress, she was quiet. She stood there, but her whole body seemed to be glowing, which made people involuntarily focus their eyes on her. At this moment, He-Shui couldn't even describe her feelings. Even as a woman, she had to admit that she had never seen such a beautiful person of the same sex, especially the temperament of the other party. He-Shui looked down at the resume again. 23 years old. She took a deep breath, and her eyes gradually lit up. The other party was very young, but she couldn't see the slightest childishness from her. It was a kind of indescribable maturity and elegance, but also full of vitality, quiet, indifferent, calm, and strong. Almost in an instant, He-Shui was completely conquered by the other party's image. This was the person that Su Shui wanted, even if she didn't know anything. At this moment, He-Shui really thought so. Her eyes became extremely soft. She noticed that the other party's calm but not aggressive eyes were looking at her. As the so, she blushed and coughed. "Hello, Miss Li Mutong." Li Mutong looked at her and said softly. He-Shui took a deep breath, calmed herself down, and said in a softer tone, "Please introduce yourself." She nodded. "I graduated from the finance department of Beihai University, and I have a certain understanding of foreign trade. I am proficient in 4 languages, Chinese, English, Snow Country, and Germanic, and..." Her introduction was concise, but not general. Perhaps because of her beautiful voice, when she finished, the company leaders in charge of the interview all felt a little sorry. The impulse in He Yishui's heart became a reality. She just asked a question that didn't have much to do with work. Miss Li Mutong, are you married? Do you have a boyfriend? Her bright eyes seemed to dim for a moment, and she shook her head gently. No, I don't have a boyfriend. He Yishui nodded. She didn't even ask for the consent of others. She said seriously, Miss Li Mutong, I can confirm that you are the talent that our company needs. We can handle the employment procedures for you right away. In the future, I hope that you can be my special assistant. What do you think? Li Mutong was stunned and she said softly, I applied for the position of a clerk. I think it suits me very well. He Yishui frowned. The 4 positions that were recruited were the CEO's special assistant, financial assistant, business manager, and clerk. In her mind, Li Mutong in front of her could take any role. She didn't know why she chose a clerk. Was it because she had no work experience? When she was about to speak, Li Mutong smiled. I insist. He Yishui was stunned, and she took the initiative to reach out her hand. Then, welcome to Su Shui. Thank you. Li Mutong smiled. He Yishui no longer had the slightest interest in the second interview. She smiled and said, let's go. I'll take you to handle the employment procedures. You can start work tomorrow. By the way, let's exchange numbers. Where do you live? In the constant questioning, the 2 of them walked out one after another. With He Yishui's personal accompaniment, the employment procedures were completed very quickly. When Li Mutong walked out of the Su Shui trading building with the work pass, the autumn rain was still falling endlessly. She looked up at the rainy sky. After a moment of silence, she gently raised her hand and hung the light blue work pass on her snow-white neck. Under the autumn rain, she smiled extremely brightly. All the burdens and entanglements seemed to have completely left her. She turned her back to the place where she was going to work, facing the autumn wind and rain, and opened her hands. So relaxed. Like a new life. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.